What's happening, everybody? Welcome. Sorry about the delay. We are here and we're ready to a great show for you tonight, as always. Because we have Dr. Gary Brucato of Cold Case Foundation of Forensic Psychologists. He is one of the brightest men that I know. He is the author of The New Evil, which you can pick up at any bookstore near you on Amazon. Make sure if you get it on Amazon to leave a review. Like I said, it's a scaled book, so as it goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse. And tonight, Dr. Gary, we're going to talk about some of the worst that there are that people really don't know much about. You have your Bundys and you have your Dahmers and you have, your you have all kinds of serial killers, but not all of them get the coverage that sort of the mainstream do, and I don't know why that is, but we'll explore that.
Well, I think it's very interesting that people do seem to like their evil in a certain dosage. The sort of tip top of what the average reader or viewer can handle seems to stop somewhere before extreme torture, cannibalism, and other kinds of horrendous things that we would place very high in the scale of the new evil. People sort of seem to get interested up until like a serial killer that maybe commits SA over and over again, murders victim. But once you start getting into things like, the necrophiles, the killers of children, the things like that, you find that you can't give those stories away to producers, for example, of television shows or things like that. Another form of evil that people are very loath to write about and talk about is mass murder, mass shootings, things like that, probably because of the controversy surrounding firearms and the availability. But there are certain subjects like that that I think are just too evil so that people fear that they won't have an audience. Precisely for the reason that we say in the new evil, right? That the higher on the scale, the more evil an act, the more it makes you sick. You have a visceral, disgusted reaction to it, so it's unwatchable, which implies, of course, that in lower forms, people find evil watchable, interesting, right? It has to hit the like near total disgust level, and then they could, And I don't know what that's about, but I think sometimes a lot of people who are into true crime forget that these are real people. They think that these is like a horror movie or something.
Right.
But so there's that, and yeah, it's a big deal. And so what I did was I basically picked out of my records um, of infamous cases that somehow have slipped a little bit under the radar, unless you're like one of these true serial killer buffs, so to speak. Where you may have heard of these people. And in each of these cases, I have letters from the killers here, and which is also interesting. And we have some interesting footage on some of these stuff on some of these people. But people seem to like our format where we give a little history, like you read it or we watch it, and then I kind of jump in. And I do want to tell the audience how many people are watching, Josh.
Right now we are at 250 and climbing.
Oh, okay, it'll be a few thousand soon, but when it goes, when it's available for posterity, right? They'll watch it later, I guess. But live, okay. Well, I did want to tell the group that Josh and I were talking about that if you like this little series that we're doing on serial killers, particularly the obscure ones, which I'm trying out tonight, we were thinking that maybe what we'll do is have a Patreon where people can watch these deep dives where there's a little fee, but the good news is, as I understand it, unless I'm very much mistaken, Patreon doesn't really require you to edit out things. I mean, you can just sort of, you know, um, give detail within appropriate boundaries. You can give details and things and really get into them, the psychology of them. And so the way I'm seeing it is something like a kind of master class for people that they might find that interesting. And I think, Josh, you wanted to clarify that it doesn't really mean we would stop doing other things together,
No,
right? I
yeah,
mean,
we'll still be here doing things as well. It's not
mhm.
replacing anything. It's just a deeper dive, I guess, where we're not really restricted. You're not restricted, and we can sort of, you know, like you said, to go deeper into those things. Because I mean, if you watched the new Evil, or excuse me, if you've read the new Evil, you can see
I
how
listened to it on the audio. Yeah.
how deep it really is, and how frightening, that the subject matters can be. So that's the idea, and it's not, like I said, it's not going to replace anything. So that's all that I
No.
wanted to say.
So, well, the reaction in the audience is that they seem to like it. Yes, Bunny Murphy, I do believe it means I can get away with not using the ridiculous word unalive.
I don't think that we do that
I
anyway.
can't stand that word. I can't stand it, Josh. I really
We
can't.
do that. We don't
I
do that
can't say
anyway.
it. Oh, it's horrifying.
I don't say
Yeah,
it.
I mean, it's a made up word. It really bothers me when people make words up. Unalive I mean, I know that language is fluid and it's constantly developing, but unalive, I mean, my God, what a silly word.
I don't really
The
know where
only
that
thing
came.
that makes what?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like kind of a YouTube thing, because I don't really know where that came from, but I've never used that word.
It's dopey. I mean, look, as somebody that
The
appreciates
title of the
words.
show is Serial Killers.
Yeah, right, exactly. I commend you for your not having to play with words because to be honest with you, Josh, I have a general problem with the sanitation of language and the policing of language in contemporary life. I think as an academic person, it's like offensive to me. And words have very specific etymologies, and you have to be careful when you toy with them. Uh, you know, uh, like for example, the word unalive. I mean, at least the root un and the word alive are both Old English, so putting them together is not that ridiculous. But unalive is silly. What you really should say is something like, um, exterminate or something like that would be what you're attempting to say when you say unalive. But it is a goofy word, and I refuse to say it except to criticize it. So that it's one of many contemporary words I can't stand. Um, do you have
Yeah.
one of those, by the way? Do you have a
Mm,
word that a modern use of
I mean,
turn of phrase that bothers you?
it's probably that. I've talked about it before, because they tell you, I don't know who they are, but there are people that believe that you get in trouble for things like that, and that maybe you can't monetize your show, or that you'll get in trouble for saying certain things. I've heard people say some of the
Yeah.
nastiest things to people, threaten people, like, that have nothing to do with true
Mhm.
crime. This is a true crime show. We talk about crime, okay? And we do it in a way that I think is responsible. I don't think that we're trying to be offensive. And the fact of the matter is, people die, and people have committed
Yeah.
suicide before, and it happens, and it's a terrible
No,
thing.
no, I don't think you mean to use that word. I think you mean to say, as they say in
No,
the
no,
wasteland of YouTube, they self unalive.
no, that's not that. This
I
is
mean,
what
I
we
mean, these are silly words, and they are what they suggest is an institutionalized denial of the horrors of these things. When you use cute, word language or stuff like that, just say it what it is. Say what it is. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Call
I
it what
mean,
it
that's
is.
what it's
Let's
called. I
discuss
mean,
it.
and that's what it
Right.
said. Like if a medical examiner is filling something out, he's not going to say the person unalived themselves. That's not what happens. Um,
Right. Or self unalived. It is very silly.
you know
And
what? You know
and
what
I
though?
also think it's offensive. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if they demonetize the episode, I don't care. I really don't. I mean, I would rather do it tactfully and respectfully, but also authentically. And I think that I think that that's what we do, and I've never had any problems. Now, maybe I will now. Who knows? But I
Well,
don't care.
you know what it is, and it opens up a philosophical discussion, which is not for tonight. It's more like a witness box conversation.
Yeah.
Is that language is very tied to semantic meaning and philosophy and psychology and so forth. And when you change words, you change the way that people react to them. You make them softer, you take away the horror, you make them palatable. You wind up with language that's very weak, that doesn't have a punch, that's excessively long for no reason, etc. I just think sometimes it's best just to cut right to the chase and call it what it is.
Mm.
Now, regarding the cases tonight, I think we should give a little bit of a
That being said,
warning.
yeah.
Right? Yeah. What do you want? What do you want to say about that?
Well, look, I mean, if the subject matter is intense and it's graphic, and we're going to talk about it because that's what we've been doing here. We've covered Dahmer, we've covered what was the other? What was the Night Stalker? We covered him,
Ramirez,
Richard Ramirez, and so on and so on. So,
Bundy,
but
and
Bundy
Bundy. Yeah.
tonight, and then we did the Valentine's Day show. But tonight we're going to talk about
Yeah. I
three
love that one.
three un I guess you could call them under the radar, under sort of because of how their propensity for
Right.
uh, violence and things like that. So
Well, if
if
you want to make a bad pun, you could say they're under the radar.
I
They're a
like
little
that,
under the radar
I
in
like that.
terms of
And
level of fame. Right.
crafting and true crime. Thank you for becoming a member. And D's creative I love crocheting. I don't know how to, but I like when people do it. It's like amazing. It looks really hard. You crochet, don't
Well,
you?
crocheting, it's amazing. It fascinates me.
And you
Yeah,
crochet?
I mean, look at Dee there. She looks like a leader
You
with
can
all that
crochet,
all
can't you?
that
I
stuff
know you
around her.
can. You're
Yeah,
ignoring me, but
that's
you're I
amazing.
uh, well, it's not quite 9 o'clock yet, but do you want me to no? You wanna wait till midnight?
Wait till midnight.
We'll wait till midnight. All right. So here we go.
I have no idea what you're talking about. But
Well, they'll find out at midnight. Yeah, it's easy after a while. I would just suck at it.
it's pretty cool, Dee. I really love it, and the colors are really neat.
Look at this.
Look at it.
Yarn gives me the willies.
Yarn gives her the Willis. All right.
See that?
Well, we're going to be speaking about a much more disturbing Willie. Oh,
I crocheted a chicken hat for Justin. God, never ends. That guy just he loves those kinds of things. Like one time he bought a cow outfit with udders.
really?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I
Hmm.
think he just likes doing that kind of stuff.
Okay. Hey, listen, to each his own.
I guess. All right. So where do you want to start? You want to start with Nathaniel
I think we should
Bar-Jonah?
start. We should start with Bar-Jonah, and I just want to introduce the video you're going to show.
Cool. Go
And
ahead.
by the way, you talk about Justin that always talks about Summer Wells.
Yeah, he talks about Summer. He's been covering
The one who
Sebastian.
has a show about Wells that wears the glasses and
Yeah, the gay guy.
I don't know if it's necessary to describe. I know what you mean, who you mean, and I think he's terrific. I love watching
Yeah,
him. I think he's
too.
great. He's
He's a
very
friend.
entertaining, very
A friend.
intelligent. He asks great questions. I enjoy him. I think he does a wonderful show.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. I like him.
He's great.
It just
Tell
so
him I said
happens
so.
it just happens he's just gay. I mean, I don't know. I thought that maybe that would just clear everything up.
Well,
Anyway,
Bar-Jonah that we're about to talk about um, is somebody that also identified that way. And that's going to figure into a little bit into the story because he had a great deal of shame surrounding that. Um, oh, now let me introduce this here. So this is from a long time ago. Ignore me in this video. It's from some time back. when I was at Columbia in my earlier days at Columbia. And this is we were invited. Michael Stone, who was my co-author in The New Evil, my mentor, and I were invited down for this panel that was done by Science Magazine, which is a very prominent magazine. I was very proud of that. We went down to Washington, D.C., and we were interviewed about evil. And the person who's on the screen is a wonderful psychologist named Abby Marsh, who has this really unique data set where she looks at children who have psychopathic features and watches their brains develop over time with MRI, I think, to see if we can get a sense of what exactly twists these children one way or another, or if there's intervention possible, so forth. So it's really extraordinary. And she wrote this wonderful book about altruism because she's interested in the opposite of psychopaths also. And she was inspired to write that because a complete stranger saved her life on a highway where her car broke down. And I think trucks were flying and the whole thing. She's fascinating. So she's terrific. Michael is there. I'm there looking kind of like a bespectacled ghoul. And what happens is,
Tony
yeah,
Danza, to be honest with you.
yeah, I look kind of like I'm running the shop, in Nosferatu. I'm the guy that little guy with the glasses that kind of like helps bring like the sort of evil John the Baptist figure that's the harbinger of Nosferatu.
Look
Well,
like an
anyway, so yeah, it's
bear.
horrifying. I can't handle it. I hate it. But
That's
anyway, so in this video, you're going to see Michael do this thing that I have to admit I loved him for, which is where they're kind of beginning to question that there are people that really are just evil all the time, right? And I'm even going along with that, and you're going to see that I'm like, oh, I say in this like kind of soft-spoken way, yeah, there really aren't people who commit evil day in and day out. They're even the worst of us, whatever. And then Michael, because he has to kind of prove it all wrong, drops this bombshell of the story of this serial killer that we're going to talk about. And of course, he has to tell it, you know, excruciating detail. And everybody's face is just like, their jaws are open. It's like,
only the way
like, yeah,
Michael.
like when Large Marge is talking to Pee Wee and he's like, like your jaws open because it's so disturbing. But anyway, so I think if you just want to kind of run the video
Shout out
and
to
you can have fun watching everybody's
shout
subtle
out to Dr.
reactions when
Stone,
told.
by the way.
Yeah.
True legend. Great man.
Mm-hmm.
Person, which is not usually true.
Right. And Gary, I know that in your and Michael's book, you talk about the fact that you've seldom met people who are you would call truly evil at all times. So there is certainly the concept that people are evil some of the time, or so-called evil, when they're committing evil acts.
Well, once we have laid
Dear
the groundwork
Lord.
for the conversation in emphasizing that what we're talking about are actions as opposed to people that are engaged, where a person is evil or that there is a supernatural force that is involved in evil, where we're really just adopting a word from the common parlance for these kinds of acts, then what we have to clarify is that rarely, even in the most egregious repeat offenders, do you see somebody that from dusk till dawn is committing acts that would be considered evil. As a matter of fact, most of for example, people who engage in sexual homicide, serial killers, so forth, even these individuals who commit repeat horrendous acts that might be called evil commonly, often have double lives, where they're fathers or are considered beloved co-workers or so forth, and then in private have this sort of split off component of their lives where they're committing these actions.
Michael?
Now here it goes.
There's therefore a very, very small number of people who, as Dr. Brucato was mentioning, who do evil things, as it were, from the minute they wake up in the morning until they go to sleep at night. The one that comes closest to mind is the one that I interviewed for the Discovery Channel program some years ago, and that was David Paul Brown, his real name, who then changed his name when he was in prison first time to Benjamin Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, who was a gay pedophile who would seduce boys coming out of a theater and then try to capture them, and if he could, kill them and so on. Some of them escaped and managed, to identify him, and then he spent some years in prison in the Massachusetts area before he was then released by a judge who listened to a psychiatrist who said, well, he seems to be better now, even though he really wasn't. The minute he got out, he tried to attack another boy. He weighed about almost 400 pounds, and he was in imagine
He was 5'10".
like a parking lot where there's a shopping mall.
Beefy.
He got into the car and sat on a little boy of 7 or 8, and was crushing him and so on. The mother came out and was horrified, and he, okay. And she was going to call the police, but the mother came, the mother of Bar-Jonah still loved her son and stuck up for him, and said, I'll promise you my boy, he was never going to do that. He's going to go to live with his brother in Montana. Okay, so out in Montana, he then dressed as a policeman with a fake badge and would seduce little boys like 10 years old or whatever, coming out of a school, and taser them and drag them to his apartment, where he would torture them prolongedly, kill them, eat part of the boy, and what he didn't eat, he would serve to the people living next door as though it were deer meat. And that was something, and he had thousands of pictures of boys and on the walls, and making up very bad comments and puns, as if some young kid, as if that was a Chinese menu item on a menu, some young kid. So that he could be counted on, one of the few people that I know of who was evil day in and day out. That's very rare. There was another fellow, Leonard Fraser, in Australia, that also had that quality of being evil all the time, but they're rare. And others, like Dr. Brucato was mentioning, have a wife to whom they're very pleasant and nice, but then because of the split in their personality, they vary, they swing back and forth between being socially agreeable and being wicked.
So I'm, just as you discuss this, I feel, this disgust and repulsion, thinking about this. And so
joy
I'm assuming that this is what drives people to label someone as evil.
Point.
And I mean, that he was going for the effect. I mean, once again, so what was the preamble to this from the fella?
Because the whole point is that for Michael and for me, obviously we're not talking religiously here. Evil, when people apply that word, clinicians, judges, reporters, and whatever, what they're really talking about is when they have such an intense emotional reaction to a crime that they go groping for a word that's worse than bad, because it's so extra, it's so beyond, right? And one of the characteristics that seems to be true of any act that you would describe as evil is that you experience a visceral repulsion when the worse the crime on the scale, the more repulsed you are. So, like, for example, if we give a talk on the scale, people stop eating during the talk, or they get up and they leave once we get past around 18. And you start to notice that nobody is lifting the drink anymore, or nobody is, people are looking in their bags probably for like Tums, it's too horrifying. And, and I get a big smile on my face no matter, it's like I was not even listening to the content because I was just looking at Michael and missing him. But I know what he was talking about, and it's, of course, extremely disturbing. But I miss Michael so much that to sort of hear his voice is very strange. This is the curse I have, that I get along best with people that are like octogenarians, and then I lose them. But the thing is, he was a very great human being.
No.
Now, so what was the point of what he was doing? He was trying to prove the point that even though we have found ways to explain away biologically and psychologically these things, right? We would say that Bar-Jonah has a paraphilic disorder. We would say that he was a psychopath. We would say, that he had certain traumatic experiences in his lifetime. He still makes you want to vomit morally. That's what he's trying to prove, that there is still this thing that is evil, that is extra. I'm sure there wasn't a person in the audience that didn't feel that way. And he's telling, as I remember the clip, because as I said, I was looking at him and not really listening to him anymore. But I remember him saying that Bar-Jonah would like sit on the victim and smother them, because he was so enormous physically. And that incident of serving the child, which is, some people question it, some people say it really happened, but as I remember it, it was something like the neighbors were looking for their missing kid. And you have to picture him going over and saying, like, I'm here to console you. I have some extra venison. Would you like to eat,
Which
the
is just
venison? And
unheard.
it's like their own kid. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
you gotta, and in the New Evil, we talk about this phenomenon of forced cannibalism. It's an idea that I introduced. I don't know of anyone who has ever talked about that as a phenomenon. So I discussed it in the New Evil as that there are two types. There's forced cannibalism where the person is unconscious of what they're eating, like we're going to see in the Pickton case, and then and there's the kind where you do know what you're eating, but you're being forced to eat it, like a horrifying case that I talk about in the New Evil of people who were abusing terribly a family member who had severe autism, and they punished her by making her eat the cremated remains of her mother in a cereal bowl. So it's not quite like eating the arms and legs, out in the open, but it was ash. But it was still cannibalism, right? Technically. But so she kind of knew what she was eating, but they forced her to do it. And that's in addition to things like licking the toilet and other horrifying things that they did to her. But that was a torture case. In this case, no one knew what they were eating. So this is a forced cannibalism case, a really, really sadistic to do. Now, if you want Wikipedia, you could read a little bit about his background, which I think is very interesting to talk about. I agree with the people in the audience that saying this is why they prefer animals to people.
Oh, I mean, I see here. Let me bring this up really quick. Yeah, that is a fact that people are just. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I think saying it's like demon possessed is just kind of a cop out, but I don't know how else to explain stuff like that.
He was pretty bad. I mean, one of the points Michael was making, just to be clear, is that there really aren't people who do what would be called evil acts every minute of the day. They don't sit around like Satan, chortling and twiddling their thumb, their fingers and doing. Most of these people are pretty fragmented, and that's what Michael goes out of his way to say is that there's some kind of split or compartmentalization in the personality with most of these people. But
Dr. Gary,
every
let me get my
once in a while,
glasses.
you get these people just day in and day out are horrendous. I would put David Parker Ray into that category. I think David Parker Ray did evil things pretty much day in and day out, all day, every day, essentially. So you went to get your spectacles? Were you trying to look like me? You notice, by the way, that he changed his name to a Jewish name. This is a letter, by the way, from him. And you'll notice that he made his own stationery where there were like cowboy images and these very hyper virile images, of him working like wrangling cattle and waving an American flag up here. I mean, this is an image that would be very popular among some people today because it's so nationalistic, and has him in a cowboy hat with an American flag on like on a horse, and some childish cartoon imagery, which is very creepy. And one of the things that I thought was very disturbing about this letter is that he goes on at one point, he says, can you send me some of your favorite recipes? And do you have anyone special in your life? I don't and really don't want anyone right now. Besides, with my time I'm doing, it's not like we'd have a life. 130 years with no chance of parole is a lot of time to do, even though I'm confident that my circumstance will change and my supposed victim will come forward and admit he lied. God has never left me stranded. And I found that whole passage extremely disturbing because, first of all, notice the can you send me a favorite recipe immediately followed by do you have anyone special in your life? Given the accusation of the force feeding of the victim in the form of deer meat, that becomes extremely disturbing. And then on top, I mean, and then on top of it, kind of essentially making that sexual advance and implying, are you single? Are you available? And then thinking he's going to get out of jail because the victim lied. I mean, can you imagine? He's obviously talking about some kind of child abuse victim, supposed victim. I mean, that's terrible. Did you hear me talk about the letter, Josh?
No.
Oh, you missed all that. Okay, well, you'll watch it back later, I guess. But anyway, so but I do have that letter from him. It is pretty creeptastic.
Jonah?
Yeah, and then I was saying that in the letter, Josh, he basically is asking for recipes, and then makes like an advance, like, "Are you single?" That kind of thing. And there's also one other part here where he says, where he again is stuck on this thing of wanting recipes, and then he says, just so you know, if you send me any photos, they can't be nude or suggestive. And it's very interesting because what he's supposedly asking for are recipes, and then tells you to be careful that you don't send anything nude or suggestive. So I'm not so sure that he means recipes, or that unless that's just some kind of code. But anyway, so very, very disturbing.
I want to start with just his. How do you want to start him here?
Talk about his disturbing childhood. The background on the case. It is fascinating. It is a fascinating case.
Yeah, we'll do early life here. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah was born David Paul Brown in Worcestershire, Massachusetts, on February 15th, 1957. The youngest of three children to Philip and Tyra Brown, an aircraft mechanic and a housewife. When Tyra was 3 months pregnant with Bar-Jonah, she was involved in a serious car accident when another driver slammed into the back of her vehicle while she was sitting at a red light, resulting in her having to wear a neck brace for the last 6 months of her pregnancy. As an infant, Bar-Jonah was described as being inactive and having an insatiable appetite, which resulted in him crying incessantly when he was not otherwise being fed. This caused him to gain so much weight as a baby that he became practically immobile due to his undeveloped muscle tone. And his parents struggled to carry him. Bar-Jonah also appeared to be strongly averse to being touched. And at 3 weeks old, experienced hydrocephalus. What is that?
Hydrocephalus means water, like water on the brain. It's a neurological condition that has to do with there being essentially excessive liquid in the brain.
Shortly after Bar-Jonah's birth, his family moved to Lantana, Florida, and stayed there for 6 years when his father worked for McDonnell Douglas. In 1964, the family moved back to Worcestershire when Bar-Jonah's father became a heavy equipment mechanic at the local construction firm. According to Bar-Jonah, his father was a strict disciplinarian who frequently beat him with a thick leather belt due to his fear that his son would grow up to be a homosexual, and because Bar-Jonah was a kleptomaniac who frequently stole from his siblings and other children. In late July 1964, before the move back to Massachusetts, and then 7-year-old Bar-Jonah lured a 5-year-old female neighbor into his basement, telling her that he had received a Ouija board for his birthday. that could predict the future. Once in his basement, Brown attempted to choke the girl. The child's screams attracted the attention of Bar-Jonah's mother, who came to her rescue, but he got off with little to no punishment. At age 15, Bar-Jonah cut letters and words out of magazines and composed a note that he used to attempt to entice two young boys from Webster to a cemetery, offering them $20 and a surprise. In that case, the mother of the two boys declined to press charges against Bar-Jonah, thinking it would be best if he received psychiatric treatment. The following year, in May 1974, Bar-Jonah attempted to abduct 9-year-old Mary Patrone in Woodstock, Connecticut, but released her when she screamed and resisted. In March 1975, now 17, Bar-Jonah impersonated a police officer in order to abduct 8-year-old Richard O'Connor on his way to school, proceeding to sexually assault and choke the boy. A neighbor looking out the window observed the abduction and notified authorities, who began searching for O'Connor. A patrol car later observed a vehicle matching the use, or that used in, observed a vehicle matching that used in the abduction, parked far away from others in a parking lot. After calling for backup, ordered Bar-Jonah out of the car. A bloodied O'Connor was found inside the car, having defecated and urinated on himself from the sexual assault, and he was near the point of death. A few days before his high school graduation, Bar-Jonah drove to nearby Hartford, Connecticut, and again impersonating a police officer, abducted a 9-year-old girl. However, after the child began vomiting and convulsing from the assault, he drove to the sidewalk and threw the girl out of the car. A nearby witness saw the incident and got Bar-Jonah's license plate, leading to his arrest. News of this assault never reached Bar-Jonah's probation officer, and he was released from parole in May 1976 for his earlier abduction and sexual assault of O'Connor. When Bar-Jonah's probationary period was over, he received a letter thanking him for his cooperation. And on September 24th, 1977, Bar-Jonah claiming to be an undercover FBI agent, convinced two boys coming out of a movie theater in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, to enter his vehicle. He then transported the boys to a secluded area where he handcuffed and tortured them. After jumping repeatedly on the chest of one of the boys, the 370-pound or 170 kilo Bar-Jonah believed he had killed him. Then he drove off with the other boys still alive in his trunk. However, the first boy regained consciousness and managed to find help, leading shortly thereafter to Bar-Jonah's arrest. The other boy was found still alive in the trunk. And for his crime, Bar-Jonah was convicted of attempted murder and received a maximum sentence of 18 to 20 years at the Massachusetts Correctional Institution of Concord, but was later transferred to Bridgewater State Hospital for observation after sharing his violent sexual fantasies with a prison psychologist. And at the conclusion of the observation period, Bar-Jonah was sentenced to an indefinite term at Bridgewater. I think you're muted. Hold on. Wait, Dr. Gary. Wait a minute. You're mute. You muted yourself.
Here I am. Ready?
Yep.
What he's talking about, I mean, a muted Dr. Brucato will never do.
It's useless.
Sorry, that's like in some ulterior bizarro universe, maybe he exists, but not here.
Not here.
Here he speaks
You need him to.
nonstop. But anyway, so when he's talking to the psychiatrist, instead of hiding his horrifying crimes, he's basically talking about how he has had long-standing fantasies about butchery and cannibalism. And you have to understand that when this guy's property gets searched, they eventually search the house because there's some question of him having killed a boy. This is the one he calls, I think that's the one he's talking about, the supposed victim in the letter. Because he's denying the kid is even dead, right? He's basically
Right.
saying like he's out there somewhere and it's a lie and it's a conspiracy. And what happens is they discovered that he has this list of like 50 some odd kids all over the place, and no one really understands what it is. Like, are they victims? Are they, and one of the most horrifying things about this case is that in addition to about 3,500 photographs, some of them, I think a lot of them being Polaroids that were taken of people that were victims, is that he was doing this thing. Now, this is like something right out of a horror movie, okay? He had a giant kind of scrapbook where when they looked at the scrapbook, all it was pictures that were cut out of little kids' school yearbooks. Understand? Like, you got to picture this, like, those yearbooks where everybody gets the photo and they're all those they horrify us to look back at because we're like little boys and little girls at the time. We all have a
Right.
face like the wolf of God. Each of those photos like pasted in with like little notes and things around it, where there were these horrifying fantasies, I guess, about these people, but some of them could have been victims. We don't know. And then the other thing is that there were comments there in the notes and that were extremely suggestive. Like in one note, he makes reference to roasting a victim and serving the victim at a barbecue. And there were a lot of these, like Dr. Stone was talking about, these horrifying puns where he's making the names into food names and menu items and things like that. So what it looks like is that even though he gets like one murder pinned on him and a lot of child abuse, what it looks like is that he was really a very active serial killer of children that eliminated them basically by feeding them to people or eating them. But we don't know that for sure. So it's pretty bad. And you can see why he's not talked about very much. I mean, they're not going to make a Netflix documentary about this guy. You know what I mean? It's
I mean,
it's
I
just,
understand.
yeah, right. But think about those yearbooks, Josh. The yearbook photos. I mean, isn't that just creepy?
Yeah, I mean, look at this photo of him right here. Hold on.
You notice some of the victims are female, some of the victims are male in
Yeah,
the suspected
he
victims.
doesn't seem to discriminate when it comes to that.
It's like a free for all. Yeah. It's a disturbing kind of paraphilic disorder where the only thing the person needs to have is they just need to be at a certain age.
Yeah.
There's really no interest in terms of the sex of the child. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
And he was a big guy. He had that kind of oral fixation from childhood where eating was associated with like love and attention. And I'm sure that if somebody like me went in and talked to him, he would have said something like that's how he felt close to the victims, and some very disturbing thing like that was eating them, bringing them close to himself, bringing it close to the heart, that kind of thing. But
yeah.
that's
And
the kind of creepy thing these guys say. Yeah.
so did he die of natural causes or was he executed? I don't. He got okay. So he got 130 years in prison.
Right.
Let me see here. But his crimes went on. He must have died from.
He died of poor health.
I would
Basically, he just
yeah.
had health complications, if I remember correctly. They
Yeah.
basically found him. He was 51, I think, and they basically found him like unresponsive in the jail cell. And what happened was they cordoned off the cell because even in jail, he had left mountains of cryptic notes. So they wanted to see if they could tie him to murders with the notes that he had left.
So he was. So
And
when he was.
he was never tried for killing the boy that he fed to the friends and family.
Yeah, and
He
I
was
and I'm,
there for child abuse cases.
I'm
Yeah.
also seeing here that. Do you want me to talk? You want me to read a little bit about when he was released?
I think everything about him is very interesting from a
Sure.
criminological perspective. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's just disgusting. He's a disgusting person. but it is also very interesting. So whatever you want
Yeah,
to
let
read
me
about him, go
just go
ahead.
a little bit here and give a little more background on him. On March 22nd, 1984, David Paul Brown legally changed his name to Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Bar-Jonah. That's a mouthful. He gave several reasons for changing his name. He told
He
friends
never kept kosher. He clearly didn't care about the kosher rules,
not at all.
things like that, right? Yeah,
He
life being in the blood and all these ideas, right?
He told friends and relatives that he wanted to know what it was like to be discriminated against and persecuted as a Jew. During a later 2008 interview with Dr. Michael H. Stone from the television show Most Evil, he claimed
My
he
boy.
was Jewish
Yes.
and wanted his name to reflect that. In fact, Bar-Jonah's ethnicity or ethnic ancestry was Scandinavian, and his parents were both active in the Assemblies of God, a Pentecostal sect, and did not pursue any other further connection to Judaism other than the name change. So he's, first of all, he's no George Costanza, Latvian Orthodox Jew for a woman.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
He
No, there
went
was no, it was a bizarre meaning, a reason for it. I'm sure that's a phony story that he did it because he wanted to experience,
worse.
what it was to be persecuted as a Jew. But if that were true, just think for a second about, and I'm sure this occurred to Michael, he wasn't my mentor for no reason.
It's a great question.
That you have a person who was eating people, cooking them, right? Cooking them, and then becomes interested in identifying with Jews who died in the Holocaust is very interesting, right? People that were incinerated in the Holocaust, and I wonder about that. It's because what it suggests to me is a sadomasochistic person who, at the same time that he's inflicting sadistic torture, is interested in what it would feel like to be the victim himself. Remember, for example, Albert Fish, who was a torturer of children and ate them, who
Yeah.
reminds me of this dude, right? Except that Albert Fish was psychotic and this guy wasn't. Albert Fish was fascinated by sadomasochistic, experiences. And when they killed him in Old Sparky, in the electric chair at Sing Sing, he was thrilled about it. His eyes glistened when they went to go. The Daily News went there to look at the execution. He looked happy. He talked about that he was going to have a masochistic experience he had never had before in being electrocuted to
Dr.
death.
Gary, this is where his
And
victims
there's a little of
always
that
children?
going on with these people. Say that again?
Were his victims always children?
Yeah, I think so. That's all he was interested in.
Yeah.
That's all he was interested in.
Where can we get
But
to
I think that so he was basically a sex offender with a paraphilic disorder, a very infantile person, very arrested in the kind of oral stage of development, in a lot of ways. And was somebody who basically was appeased when he was upset by being fed, and was a person who just had no limitations on anything that he wanted. And there was this sort of pathetic attempt to be like a big man and a grown up, with the police outfit and the cowboy imagery and all this other crap. But in reality, he felt like a little small nothing. And again, you see that sadomasochistic dynamic, right? Am I the big guy? Am I the weak little boy? That kind of thing. So you want to sort of think about that, and think about when he is crushing a child with his giant body. You could see the symbolism of it. I'm not the weak one that gets crushed. You are. That kind of thing. So that's him, and I think he really sets the stage for the rest of our interesting evening here.
No question.
Yeah.
And let me thank Gypsy Nielsen here. Thank you
Thank
for doing such interesting shows. You're both wonderful, and like I said, it's just a treat to be able to tap into Dr. Gary's just his expertise. And there was a great question. Parole. Yes, he was paroled. Let's hear about it a little bit. Later in 1984, Bar-Jonah, along with two psychologists that had evaluated him, won a parole hearing after a psychologist testified that he was no longer a threat to society. Superior Court Judge Walter Steele ruled that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had failed to prove that Bar-Jonah was dangerous. and ordered him released on February 12th, 1991. Administrative issues prevented his release until July of that year. Maybe they needed new psychologists. I don't know. During that time, Bar-Jonah confided in psychiatrists that he fantasized about abducting, murdering, and cannibalizing children. A psychiatrist at Bridgewater was apparently informed by Bar-Jonah that his interest in torture had long existed and that his primary meals of sexual arousal came from the violent thoughts he entertained. On August 9th, 1991, just a month after being released from Bridgewater, Bar-Jonah observed a 7-year-old boy sitting alone in a car outside of a post office in Oxford, Massachusetts. Bar-Jonah, who weighed 275 pounds at the time, entered his vehicle and sat on the boy's chest. Some witnesses, along with the boy's mother, observed the event and ran to the boy's rescue, causing Bar-Jonah to flee. An officer recognized Bar-Jonah's description from over 15 years earlier, and he was later arrested for the attack. At first, Bar-Jonah claimed that he entered the car to get out of the rain, but later admitted that he intended to kill the boy for the attack. Bar-Jonah was given permission by the Worcester County District Attorney to enter a guilty plea to assault and battery in exchange for a 2-year probationary period and the promise he would move back to Great Falls, Montana to live with his mother. Now here is, and somebody was asking earlier as well, about, was there any DNA or anything like that? Now look, DNA was at its very infancy, if even at the time, of this going on. But here's a little bit about his arrest. On February 6th, 1996, 10-year-old Zachary Ramsey left the apartment he shared with his mother around 7:43 a.m. to attend Whittier School, taking his usual route through an alleyway near the 400 block of North 4th Street in Great Falls. Never arrived at school. Ramsey was wearing a blue denim jacket with green sleeves, a blue football jersey with his last name imprinted on the back in gold letters, stonewashed jeans, and black high-top sneakers. A family of 3 who lived in an apartment overlooking the alleyway reported seeing Ramsey there that morning, and also reported seeing an off-white 4-door car nearly run him over. Another witness reported seeing Ramsey stand in the alleyway. Yet another witness who lived near the end of the alleyway reported seeing Ramsey crying with an upset, obese adult male following him a few feet behind at about 7:45 a.m. And a witness personally knew Bar-Jonah reported seeing him standing beside a dumpster in the alleyway at 7:15 a.m. while taking out the trash. He was wearing a navy blue police-like jacket. The same witness also reported seeing Ramsey enter the alleyway later, and Bar-Jonah was still standing beside the dumpster. Somewhere between where the alleyway cut into 6th Street and comes out 7th, Ramsey disappeared and he was never found. School officials contacted his mother when he failed to report for class that day. His mother filed a missing persons report later that afternoon, and Detective Bill Beluski was given a list of local registered sex offenders by the FBI, but focused his suspicion on Bar-Jonah, who was not on the list. Belushi requested a search warrant for the house where Bar-Jonah and his mother lived after police made an unsuccessful attempt to access the property, but he was denied. Belushi unsuccessfully solicited a new search warrant shortly after. Bar-Jonah moved out of his mother's house. And on December 13th, 1999, Bar-Jonah was seen outside an elementary school for the 3rd time in a week. And he was wearing a dark blue jacket and a knit cap. He was carrying 2 cans of pepper spray, a toy gun, and a badge. Belushi, at the Montana Attorney General, Belushi and the Montana Attorney General charged Bar-Jonah with impersonating an officer and for carrying a concealed weapon. The judge approved a search warrant on December 15th for the impersonation objects in both Bar-Jonah's new apartment and his mother's house. The police found 2 coats, one with a toy badge in the pocket, a second badge, and a stun gun, baseball cap reading security enforcement. They also found a pulley on the ceiling of Bar-Jonah's kitchen, 2 albums with cutouts of children, a document about knots and bondage, and an article on autoerotic asphyxiation.
Yeah. Well, you know, if for those in the audience who could stomach it and are interested in the fuller details of the case, there's a very good write-up of it in this book, True Vampires by Sandra London. And it's very interesting because the illustrations in the book are done by the cannibal um, Nicholas Claux, Claux, the Vampire of Paris. And it covers a lot of cases, including Bar-Jonah, but you know, Albert Fish and Shawcross and Toole and Curtin and a lot of other cannibals. But I think it's it's a very well done book, and you know, you get a kind of no holds barred the version of the story. So, but I think Josh, you know, you have to kind of pause and just think about the level of depravity that we just referenced, right? In this little superficial view of this guy's case, because we're talking about a person who who was a sex offender, but who was clearly drawn to extreme torture. I mean, we have no idea what he did to these kids because their bodies are gone, or how many victims there even were, if it was more than one murder, if, you know, etc. Remember, he was just in jail for the sex offending, and he took everything to the grave with him. But there's evidence that would suggest that in addition to killing victims, they were being involved in sadistic torture, asphyxiation, you know, toying with breathing, ropes and things like that, very John Wayne Gacy style stuff, right? And then they're dead, and then they're cooked up, and then they're served to people, and there's that kind of sadism. So you just have to kind of imagine, you know, what you're dealing with here. And then, of course, there's the symbolism of, you know, forcing the child into a person is like a way of saying, you know, if you think of him as the child, it's like we're saying, you don't want to pay attention to me, I'm going to literally be crammed down your throat. You know, like here I am, yeah, you know, and because I think that was a big piece of it, was that feeling of being kind of overlooked. No matter how much he cried and screamed or whatever, he was just appeased with food. He wasn't attended to.
What about this right
Yeah.
here, Dr. Gary? It says we have a case in Connecticut right now. A man convicted of murder, 8 brains and eyeballs, released last week from a psychiatric facility. Unbelievable. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard a little bit about it, but I'm going to be cautious to comment on it because this is one of these things where the etiology of that has to be sorted out legally. You know, like if it's the case, I think. But you have to remember that there are many reasons why people cannibalize. One of the points we make in the New Evil is that the motive for that could be anything from a psychotic disorder to drugs and alcohol, all the way up to the most outrageous sadistic cruelty. So you could be like anywhere on the map, right? Like you could be a schizophrenic that's eating people like Albert Fish, or you could be eating people like Jeffrey Dahmer, who was a sexually sadistic serial killer, right? So it could be all over the map. So in and of itself, cannibalism is very hard to categorize. You need the remainder of the story, right? Right. No, no. But the problem is this could have been somebody, for example, who was, let's say, using drugs or, completely psychotic or whatever. We don't know the motive.
Yeah.
The people that are on the list and even on the cover of the book of True Vampires are all over the map, right? I mean, you've got people like Rod Ferrell, who thought that he was a vampire. He thought that he was a multiple 100-year-old vampire called Visago, who like literally slept upside down like a bat and was engaging in ritualistic cannibalistic acts, kind of like a mockery of the Eucharist, where you'd pass around and eat right. I mean, there's that kind of person, right? Or you get, you have Ed Gein here, right, on the cover. Ed Gein, of course, being somebody that I never thought of as a cannibal, but who was somebody who was basically using the remains of dead people dug up from the cemetery to make bodysuit, a woman's suit. But he was a schizophrenic, right? Completely different kind of person. Or you've got Arthur Shawcross, the child abuser and killer of prostitutes, who engaged in a little bit of cannibalism and said that bodies taste a great deal like pork. They're all very different, and so it just kind of proves the point. Cannibalism or those kinds of horrendous acts are very difficult to categorize motivationally. So I would
Yeah,
say in
I
that
think
case that's been talked about, let's sort of let the case unfold before we talk about the motive. So do you want to move to
I think
Albright?
the case is
Charles Albright?
done. He's released.
Yeah, but I haven't heard the motive. I want to
Oh,
hear
yeah,
the motive before I comment on it.
gotcha.
So let's talk about Charles Albright. Is that okay?
Sure,
That's
absolutely.
that's quite a case. I'm writing about him for my new book, actually. I have a lot to say about that case. My God, what a case! Do you have anything you can share? There really isn't video footage of him, but could certainly show his mugshot, and
Right.
we can read a little bit of his history.
Let me
But while you're
see.
pulling that up, I'll explain that Charles Albright was somebody who, during the Great Depression, was basically abandoned as an infant and taken in by a couple. The mother's name, I think, was Dell, if I remember correctly, and he was quite close with her, and she introduced him in childhood to taxidermy, squirrels and little things like that he would mount very handsomely, and he was quite good with it. He was adept at it. But they couldn't afford those shiny glass eyes that you put into taxidermy animals. They would put these black buttons. You have to picture like Coraline, the big black buttons like for eyeballs
Yeah,
on these creatures. And he develops, he's sort of like one of these people preoccupied with religion and all that Christian faith and all that. And of course, he thought he was the center of the universe, not God. But he becomes preoccupied with that. And there's some speculation that he was very caught up in passages in the New Testament that have a lot to do with eyes. Like if your eye makes you sin, pluck it out, like that kind of thing.
sure.
And what happens is he's increasingly obsessed with eyeballs. And there's this incident when he is a teenager where he's dorming, I think, with this guy who brings this woman over that he's dating, who is very pretty. And Charles Albright notices right away that she has these very flashy eyes that really catch the light, that are very beautiful. And the guy breaks up with her, with this woman that had these very pretty eyes. And he goes out with someone else who didn't have eyes that Charles Albright thought were so lovely. And as I recall the story, he literally cuts the eyeballs out of pictures of the first woman and pastes them over the eyeballs of the second woman to make her have more interesting eyes in imagery. And this is like a total kind of fetishistic preoccupation for this guy. And then he gets involved in a whole bunch of petty crime because he has criminal versatility. He's a psychopath, right? So he winds up doing things like faking having gotten a teaching degree and taking a teaching job. And then he gets caught and loses it. And things like that. He's basically like a crook and everything else. And what winds up happening is he goes on to kill several women and to meticulously, with an unbelievable anatomical skill, remove the eyeballs of the victims to keep essentially as trophies of these victims. So you have to. Now, I've seen the crime scene photos of these women dead with these black almond shaped holes, where their eyeballs once were. And, you could just imagine the officers going to the scene of crime, one crime after the other, and discovering these women without their eyes, and how horrifying this would have been, right? And so he is called the eyeball killer. So if you want to talk a little bit about his history,
Sure.
from what you find online, but I mean, isn't that disturbing?
I mean, the guy freaks me out already.
Well, yeah,
Charles
right.
Frederick Albright.
Ramirez kept eyeballs too, from
I didn't
Mrs.
actually.
Zanzada. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. Let me see here. So Charles Frederick Albright and Wisdom. By the way, I wanted to say that Dr. Gary has a professional responsibility for that. I get it. Trust me. I would not want that person out in the public near me ever, but I get it.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, it's after midnight, Jeff.
Oh, here we go. All right, let me. Is this thing on? Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Dr. Gary, happy birthday. And this comes straight from the Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, okay.
Right? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Dr. Gary.
Mr. President.
Yeah. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Dr. Gary.
Thank you.
That's
I'm
awesome.
horrified, but
Well, you asked for
I
it.
keep picturing you with that wig and looking something like Buffalo Bill, with
I
the,
wish I would have had
the
some. I wish I would have been wearing lipstick, honestly. The little.
wow.
Happy
Well, okay. Riding on
birthday.
a camel, I'm sure.
Oh man. So do you got plans for your birthday? Obviously tomorrow, but I mean tonight it is your official birthday.
I do. I mean, I'm gonna see family. But I to be honest with you, I think of a birthday more as like a day to allow other people to celebrate you. Like
Sure.
I couldn't care less about it, you know what I mean? But it's sweet that people want to celebrate you. You let them. You know what I mean? It's a
Well,
sort of a loving thing that they want to do.
that said
So
that
I think
he's
it's
surviving. He was doing okay. He has a headache now. Thanks, Josh. Well,
Oh,
yeah.
who is Seth talking about?
He's talking about he's surviving. He was.
Himself?
I asked how he was doing.
Oh,
He said he's doing okay, but now he has a headache because of me.
oh,
Happy birthday, Mister.
yeah. It's a special kind of singing, Josh. I don't know what to tell you. I remember once the comedian Fred Allen um was he went to go see somebody, I think it was Tallulah Bankhead, sing in a show, and he had this very cranky way of talking like this, and after the show they walked up to him and said, "What did you think of Miss Bankhead singing?" And he said, without missing a beat, he said, "It sounded like somebody pulling his foot out of a bucket of yogurt." Well, kind of what came to mind. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, you don't sing very badly. What are you, a tenor?
I have actually quite a vocal range. Yeah. Tenor is
Really?
yeah. Yes. I was in choir, I sang in church. It was the
You
whole thing.
did?
Oh yeah.
We've got to get together sometime. I'll play the piano. You can sing. It'll be great.
We can sing Ebony and Ivory.
Yes. Yes, we could.
We could. We're not going to, but we could. All right, here we
do
go.
that then. Okay. All right. So, and I also have a letter from Charles Albright, which I can share.
I don't want to tell you about Motown.
Let's read a little bit of the history.
I tried out for a boy band a long time ago. It didn't work out.
Yeah, bop. Okay, so go ahead.
No, not Charles Frederick Albright, August 10th, 1933 to August 22nd, 2020. Wow, so he lived a long time. Good Lord. Let me just go to his, I don't want to do that. I want to talk about his childhood. So Charles Albright was born in Amarillo, Texas on August 10th, 1933. He was adopted from an orphanage by Dell and Fred Albright. His adopted mother, a school teacher, was very strict and overprotective of him, accelerating his education to help him skip 2 grades. At age 13, he was already a petty thief and was arrested for aggravated assault. And at age 15, he graduated from high school and enrolled at North Texas University. He expressed an interest in training as a medical doctor and a surgeon. He undertook pre-med training but failed to complete it. At age 16, the police caught him with stolen petty cash, 2 handguns, and a rifle, where he spent a year in jail. After his release from jail, he attended Arkansas State Teachers College and majored in pre-med studies. After being found with stolen items, he was expelled from the college, but he was not prosecuted. He went on to falsify a degree. He stole documents. And forged signatures, giving him a fictitious bachelor's and master's degree. He married his college girlfriend. What's that?
You see what I mean? He was a total BS artist, always.
Yeah, well, that's kind of like, that was just like
Psychopath.
Bundy.
Yeah, he's a psychopath.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
But you notice the point being that is this whole idea of being an intruder, like an imposter. So when you achieve something and you look like a big man, there's a secret, right? Which is that you're not.
Right. I mean, yeah, you seem to see that a lot with these kind of guys, huh?
Of course. Don't forget he was adopted. Adopted people, healthy adopted people. I have to tell you, I've treated them, a lot of them, for years. And a very common theme among them is a terrible feeling that they have to be worth it.
I'm
They have to
adopted.
do something to be likable, or they have to do something where for the rest of their lives, this kind of neurotic idea that if they're not good enough, like the person's going to like return them, like they're not going to want them anymore, that they have to earn that they were saved from what could have happened if they weren't adopted. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I don't know if I ever
And
felt like that. I'm adopted too.
are you really?
Yeah, but I was adopted by my grandparents. Yeah. But I mean, I didn't get picked from an orphanage.
Oh, you mean after your mom passed away?
Correct.
Yeah. It's different. Yeah, you were more like a foster. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's
You were like
different
in a
because
foster. They were your foster parents?
my grandparents. Yeah.
Yeah. Like what was their title for you on paper?
Guardians. Yeah, guardians. I mean, it wasn't like, and Seth is adopted too, actually.
Interesting. Oh, I didn't know that.
Well,
Well,
actually,
if I ever get to talk to Seth, I want to talk to him about that. That's interesting in terms of understanding who a person is,
no doubt. All right, so here we go to his adulthood. After his release from jail, he attended Arkansas State Teachers College and majored in pre-med studies. After being found with stolen items, he was expelled, blah, blah, blah. He went on to falsify his degree. We did that. He married his college girlfriend, and they had a daughter. He continued to forge checks and was caught in this deception while teaching at a high school and was placed on probation. And in 1965, he and his wife separated. They divorced in 1974. He was then caught stealing. And so this guy's what, a kleptomaniac? He was then caught stealing hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise from a hardware store and received 2-year prison sentence. He served less than 6 months before being released. And during this time, he began to befriend and gain the trust of his neighbors. He was even asked by local residents to babysit their children. One such child was Arnie States, who became a radio host and podcaster. In 1981, while visiting some friends, he sexually molested their 14-year-old daughter. He was prosecuted, pled guilty, and received probation. He later said that he was innocent, but had to plead guilty to avoid a quote unquote asshole. In 1984, he applied to be a leader in the Boy Scouts of America, but was rejected. Thank God somebody had some sense, right?
Yeah.
In 1985, in Arkansas, Albright met a woman named Dixie and invited her to live with him. Soon after, she was paying his bills and supporting him. He delivered newspapers in the early morning, apparently to visit prostitutes, without arousing Dixie's suspicion. He was sentenced to life without parole, and Albright died in the West Texas Medical Facility in Lubbock, Texas, in August of 2020. And he has a list of victims that go on and on. But the May 1993 Texas Monthly Magazine article, See No Evil, asked the question, how does a perfect gentleman become a vicious murderer? The eyeball killer was authored by John Matthews, the Dallas officer with his partner Regina Smith was instrumental in identifying Albright as the murderer, and the newspaper journalist Christine Wicker. How many victims did he have?
Well, off the top of my head, I want to say that I know of 3, but let me just take a quick look in my little database here, and I will tell you. Hold on a minute. So, yeah, so he was convicted of 1 and is suspected in 3 to 4. There are 3 that I recall being pretty confident have to do with him.
Yeah, so
This
one
is
of
a
them,
book
Mary
I'd
Lou
recommend about him. Hmm.
Mary
What'd
Lou.
you say?
So some of his victims, Rhonda Bowie, she was 30 years old. She was a sex worker, and that's what they were saying here
Yeah.
when he would deliver newspapers. And sex workers are often targets of serial killers because, first of all, they're easily accessible. You know, they'll get
Sure.
they'll get in
He
your
thinks
car
they're
with you,
nobody.
and
Yeah. He thinks nobody will care.
nobody's gonna care. It's like the I don't know if was it the Grim was his name the Grim Sleeper? I can't remember. He was
No,
an
what
LA,
about him?
he was an LA serial killer, and he did the same sort of thing where,
Mhm.
you know, it was just these people don't think that anybody's going to care about prostitutes, which sometimes, and even back then, was somewhat true. I mean, it wasn't a crazy thought, but eventually,
I have a letter from him too, by the way.
let's hear it.
Lonnie Franklin. No, I mean, I have a letter from the Grim Sleeper, Lonnie Franklin.
Oh yeah, okay, that's crazy.
Here in the past. But
Yeah.
this book is the book I'd recommend on um, Charles Albright. It's called Eyeball Killer. And you know, I'm very fond of these little catty mass market books on serial killers. I have quite a number of them. This particular book kind of delights me because taped into the back of it are the handwritten notes that Michael Stone made reviewing this copy of the book, which breaks down the family tree and kind of psychopathic behavior, etc., of Albright. So, I mean, just to give you a sample in his notes, it says, was described as charming and articulate, was described as gentle and helpful by neighbor and friends, had a brighter than average IQ. He claimed his IQ was 140, which would make him, you know, in the superior range. He painted pictures of eyes for fun. He was known among his friends to boast about sexual exploits beyond what they had the capacity to believe was true. He was a stretcher of reality and the truth. He said, I would like to kill every single prostitute. And he believed that his mother, his biological mother, was a prostitute. Now, that point, Michael Stone underlines in this book. And I think that's the key to the whole thing. Because Michael was very interested in the notion that in this kind of Christian household, this boy would have been very preoccupied with phrases from the New Testament that had a lot to do with eyes. You know, like I was saying, if your eye makes you sin, pluck it out. So what's the symbolism of killing a prostitute and then taking the eyeballs? For Michael, it had to do with, you know, kind of in a weird way, almost wanting to save her from sin. Personally, what I think is it had to do with not wanting to be judged by the woman. You know, one time there was a serial killer, I won't say who, there was a serial killer that I had to interview. And the serial killer became upset about a question that I asked them. And without getting into who this person was, this is a serial killer who identified as gay. And they became upset about something, and they told me in a very horrifying whisper that they were going to take my eyeballs out of my head. Like the guard was going to turn around and they were going to take my eyes out of my head. And I didn't flinch at all. You know, it's you know, like Cat Stevens. If I ever lose my eyes, I won't have to cry no more. you know. Well, anyway, so I'm just sort of sitting there, you know, with a poker face, and I said to the killer, I hope you understand that I'm not judging you for any aspect of yourself, your sexuality or anything else. And I think you think that if you take my eyes out, I can't judge you. And then everything changed. The killer felt understood
Yeah, I
and
was going to say
proceeded to
you're
make
kind of Mr. Brightside, aren't you?
Well, it's not a matter of that. I think, frankly, that
Now you
most
defuse the
people
situation. Yeah.
appreciate being understood. And you know, the reality is that I think sometimes killers do remove body parts of victims that are associated with judgment. Think of Kemper, right? Sticking the mother's kind of voice box literally down the garbage disposal, and the
Wild.
garbage disposal spitting it back out, and him seeing irony in that because he's still getting judged by her voice box, even in death. It's splashing all over him, right? You know, there are serial killers that favor tongues, eyes, heads, whatever, because the symbolism is judgment. I don't want to have this judgment. I've always been fascinated by people who commit suicide um, by harming the head,
Mm-hmm.
blowing, you know, like the blowing one's head off with a shotgun or something
Sure.
like that, because I think that the head is the source of negative thoughts and judgments,
Yeah.
and it's like a way of saying, like, I want to silence you. You know, I want you off my neck. I don't want you here anymore. You know, I'm sick of hearing my own negative judgments. I think there's a great deal of symbolism in a lot of murders and a great deal of symbolism in a lot of suicide. The way people commit, right? You get my point? I mean, if you were to kill a person with rat poison, it would tell you something about how you feel about them,
Yeah.
right? If you
Yeah.
killed
Well,
yourself with rat poison, chances are you feel like a pest, right?
listen to this here,
See?
Josh. Maybe before you end, and I know Dr. G has a background in divinity. Seth gave an intent.
Divinity. You mean studying divinity, right?
Yeah.
I've never been. I'm not Thor, you know.
Nins for prayer at the vigil Saturday, and there's a lot of interest in the angel Samuel, but nobody was quite sure who this angel is. And I'm sure you know a couple things about the
What
archangel.
was the context of where they were? What was the context of where they were talking about that?
Well, Seth gave the prayer or the vigil for Sebastian Rogers' 1 year anniversary was held yesterday, and Seth gave a powerful speech and prayer
Mhm.
where he talked about Samuel and
No, Samael, not Samuel. Big
yeah,
difference.
Samael, sorry,
Yeah.
and so
I'll tell you who it is. I mean, yeah, I know exactly what they're talking about. So you have to understand that, you know, in my interest in the construct of evil, I'm of course very interested in the figure of the devil as an interesting kind of embodiment of evil. And in the New Testament, the devil is depicted as a kind of adversary of God, a kind of, you know, dark opposite to the light of God, right? The in a yin yang kind of situation. There's this evil figure and there's a good. In the kind of Jewish Talmudic way of thinking, the devil is seen more as an accuser or a kind of like an adversary in a different way, an adversary that's sort of there to question God to prove a point, like you see in the book of Job, that there's like almost like this agreement made between them, like I'm going to make life hard for the human beings and see how they handle it for you, you know, that kind of thing. It's more of an adversarial figure in that way. And Samael is essentially the venom of God, or the angel who is essentially Satan, who is that accuser. It's a dark, it's a demonic angel that is, you know, essentially in the Talmudic tradition, is the seducer or the kind of destroying angel, fallen angel, who is there to kind of challenge people in terms of how they're going to react and get to God. And it's an interesting thing. So that's who this is. Not a good figure. Samuel is not an angel in the traditional sense. Of
right,
fallen
but
angel.
he also is a I guess what I heard is sort of a prosecutor of sins.
Yeah, like a prosecutor. Yeah, like a prosecutor, exactly. Because it's that whole idea of being the one who is testing you to see to test your mettle, that kind of thing. And by the time you get to the New Testament, the figure of the devil is quite different. There's this kind of evolution of the construct of the devil figure, right? I mean, by the time you get to the New Testament, the depiction of the devil is that he is a creature, essentially a fallen angel that has become bestial, that
Mhm.
ultimately has to be conquered in the pit, at Judgment Day, at the end of time. Remember the woman clothed with the sun and the whole thing. This figure that is sometimes identified with the Virgin Mary crushes the creature, and it's like sort of put into the pit, and then there's a renewal. The idea of getting into eschatology, the study of the end of the world, is quite fascinating. I have to tell you that we're living in times that could certainly make a lot of people wonder if about that. Of course, there have been many times all throughout history that people have thought that, because it looks like we're living in the times that have like the signs of the times, so to speak. So I think it's important to remember that Christ
A
was
lot
very
of it,
clear
though,
that we
when I
can't know the day or the hour. Remember, he doesn't even know it. He says, but it's
you would
scary
have
stuff.
to
Yeah.
you would have to listen to the part to get the full context of it, because when I was listening to it, it was people were trying to
Oh, yeah.
say that
You're frozen. There you are.
people were trying to
You
say that he
froze.
was summoning demons, and that was just totally not what
Who
was
was
happening.
summoning demons?
Well, some people thought that was the point of his message, Seth's at
Whose
the
message? Oh, Seth?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
but it's not.
I think he was I don't know, but my guess is he was talking about the idea of being tried.
And
You know,
trying the evildoers that he yes, that's what it to me, that's what it was.
right.
Um, yeah.
Well, the because what you're touching on is the theme of judgment, which gets right back to Albright. Um, his name, by the way, is interesting, right? Albright. His last
Mhm.
name ticks on an interesting. To me, he was anything but. But I think that when you get into eschatology and these kind of terrifying fears of the end of the world and the whole thing, you have to remember the word apocalypse, apocalypsos, I think. It means literally, it means the pulling away of a curtain. And that's a very beautiful idea theologically, because what it means is that at the end of time, at the end of the world, what really happens is that all of the things that we've only been able to indirectly glimpse through poetry, music, art, love, etc., we now are going to see in their naked, raw form. We don't need them to pass through a form that is more tolerable to our senses. We'll see them in raw form, out in the open. And the other thing, of course, that happens with the pulling away of the curtain is that all the phonies that look like good people that really aren't good people, the whole world sees it. And the people that look like small, invisible people that are secretly saints, the whole world sees that, and everything's out in the open. And I'm very, very oh no, I think that we didn't know that that was happening because Josh had frozen. Forgive us.
Well, I mean,
But
we're having a conversation here. I mean, it's just going to happen.
yeah, no. I
Mhm.
understand the point because I worry sometimes that I do that. I don't want to be rude like that.
You're not.
But the point is, we're talking about judgment and the end of the world because this is something that would have been in the mind of Albright. That you have to understand that about him. He was preoccupied with that idea. And it's very, very interesting to think about that he would have seen himself like a deliverer of justice to these prostitutes, right? So he sees these women and he basically thinks, you think that you're better than I am? You're abandoning me, an innocent baby, and you're a prostitute, that kind of thing, right? So the idea is he sees it that he's like delivering judgment on the person that's judging him.
Right.
So he takes the eyeballs from them, right? And then you tie that to this whole preoccupation with taxidermy. And what is taxidermy about? Well, taxidermy in a weird way is kind of like postmortem photography. It's a weird attempt to make something immortal.
Yeah, like a preservation.
It can't die ever again. It's sort of
Right.
mummified in some way, right? And that's the other piece of it is that you have a guy with some kind of abandonment preoccupation that's obsessed with this idea of taxidermy, and then these women that are mother figures become the objects of that. It tells you something about that. At the same time, he's feeling judged by them and hates them. There's a desperate desire to keep them from ever leaving. And you put those two things together, and I think you really start to understand this guy's psychology. Now, do you want me to read the letter?
Yes, please.
The letter that I have? Now, what's fascinating about this letter is that it was sent to someone that I know who posed, not me. This was a person who posed as a woman, a young woman, because they knew that he would never respond to a man. He had no interest in them. So they posed as a woman and wrote to him to try to entice him into talking, because they were journalistically interested in him. And to be honest with you, I've never read through the whole thing. I found it, he was so pompous and full of himself. I have no idea what much of this says, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. And if it gets to be too much, I'll stop. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So a letter from Charles Albright making its debut today on my birthday. So it says, "It's disgraceful for me to send you a letter which looks like this." Notice the looks, because of the preoccupation with the visual, right? Which looks like this, after you sent me one that was printed to perfection. It was one that is a credit to you and your penmanship teacher. I mean, think about that. Isn't that a weird thing to say to somebody,
It's
right?
crazy.
Or perhaps to your selection of fonts on your computer. It was perfect. So in other words, you have to picture this letter would have been one of those ones where you type and it looks like script. And he kind of doesn't know if the person has printed it or has this unbelievable, like, calligraphic writing style. And he's fascinated by it. Okay, it's interesting. Thank you for your cute card for my birthday. And it even had a candle on it. Thanks again. I won't be able to do the same for you at this time, but I promise you a nice homemade card of some kind between now and Christmas, or maybe a Halloween one. And don't worry, I won't bother you with more correspondence because I don't bother people like that. I just want to wish you a great birthday, and I hope someone out there is making you very happy. This will surprise you. And what I'm going to tell you is 100% true. By the way, that's one of my favorite phrases. Everything I'm about to tell you is 100% true, which of course means not one word of what I'm about to say to you is because you have to you know it's going to sound like BS, right?
Right.
I'm telling you and the final owner of this letter, which, by the way, Mr. Albright, means you're now telling it to thousands of people, right? Because we are now all hearing this letter. And the final owner of this letter. Now, already, by the way, Josh, you get the sense of this guy thinking this is some kind of treasure that somebody's going to keep someday, like it's so important. Okay. The truth about my case, believe it or not. Let me just see what he goes on to say. You have not written to a killer at all. I have never harmed anyone in any way. The truth you will not believe is everything that has ever been written about me was done to make me seem like a killer, but it was an orchestrated lie. The first thing I asked for after my illegal arrest was a truth test of some kind. I had never heard that before until this. One cop said, "We don't have to give you one damn thing." The DAs wouldn't, nor the FBI, in the interest of justice. I'm still trying to get one of, now you have to understand his handwriting is hard to read, so sometimes I have to pause, okay? Typed calligraphy, it ain't. Okay. I'm still trying to get one of the new foolproof ones, which operate on the MRI principle, and I usually don't even get an answer when I send them a nice, intelligent letter. I have suspected some tampering with the mail at times. So already you should be getting a flavor of paranoia, right? One of those people who kind of connects the dots wrong, you know? It's very interesting. There are studies, new recent studies that show that saliency, like things seeming like they have a meaning and that you pay attention to, has a lot to do with dopamine, which is a chemical that we know to be associated with psychotic disorders.
Yeah.
When your dopamine is high, you could be somebody that like is like that little dot means something, that kind of thing. And you have to make a narrative out of it. He was that kind of guy. Every little thing, he had to pay attention to it, make a meaning out of it. By the way, what is the MRI principle? I don't know what he's talking about. Do you?
I don't. I have no
Okay.
idea.
Anyway, and he says, this test will show that I never saw a single one of these victims. See the word saw? It's interesting. I never saw a single one of the victims. By the way, there's a little play on words there, right? Because it's saw as in a reference to the eyes, but there was also like that little device he was using to take the eyeballs out. So when he says, I never saw one of the victims, I don't know if it's a disturbing pun. It's sort of like when you've spent too much time working with criminals, you can't listen to song titles like "The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face." It takes on a double meaning, when you think about crime. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
So, and then it says,
I could die
yeah,
in your
but,
arms tonight.
yes, exactly. It takes on a double meaning. So
Yeah.
it says, I'll get one sooner or later, but they will not be able to make back to me the damage that was done for 20 years. I am now going to change my pen. I have airtight alibis for every one of these murders. They were completely ignored. The night of the murder I was convicted of, my only running car was actually locked up in a garage for repairs. There's absolutely no way to explain how I could have been anywhere else. They even tried to clean up an old 1988 case, so they charged me with this one. I was 700 miles away in New Mexico, beyond any shadow of a doubt. They never even dropped that case. One judge had already, quote, thrown the case out for lack of evidence, but corrupt Dallas, Texas still uses it. A lying Dallas cop who wrote a book on 3 phony police reports, and it goes on and on and on, and I'm not even going to read these stupid accusations that he makes because they're just dumb. And then he goes on to say, when they arrested me, they then planted evidence at the murder site. So, and it's going to go on and on like this. And then he says, mutilations? Why did they call what I did mutilations? There were no missing body parts when these girls were picked up off the street, meaning that there were none before the bodies got to the Dallas's crooked lab. The lab harvested their body parts for profit and then made it look like I did something horrific and sensational. So you see what he's saying, Josh? His justification for why these people were mutilated? I mean, you follow what he's saying?
Yeah.
That they picked up dead bodies, took them to lab, harvested their body parts, and needed someone to blame. Now, before I even proceed with this, what do you think of that weird story?
I mean, I don't know, man. It's
It's pretty out there, right?
yeah. And I think that it's hard to really put yourself in the mind of a person like that because it is so far out there. But I mean, do you really expect anything less from these people?
Well, I'm never shocked. So just to get to the end of this, it
Never
says,
shocked, but sometimes surprised, right?
yeah, no, I know. No, and then
Yeah.
it says, a lady liar. That's an interesting little alliteration that he does. A lady liar, right? The lady liar showed up and said she had done an autopsy on one of the victims. She said, in quotes, at first I thought the eyes were pierced because the eyes were still there. But after I was through, they were taking her to the cooler. I said, wait a minute, bring her back. Let me look at those eyes one more time. This time I realized that the eyes were actually gone. And then I thought, my lawyer sold me out. How do you make a mistake like this? Well, she said, there's some fatty tissue in the dot 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 impossible. In other words, it doesn't make any sense that 1 minute the eyes are there and then they're gone and a little bit of fatty tissue is left. And then it goes on and on and on to say that gradually he found that the eyeballs disappeared from the bodies. Now, first of all, this is a ridiculous story. What is he doing in the morgue, looking at the bodies with the eyes disappearing and all that? It's a crazy story.
It's
But
absolutely nuts.
it's nonsense. But what should jump out at you right away is that he thinks that the recipient of this letter is a moron who's going to believe anything that he's saying. And you notice that, yes, there are psychopaths that are liars just for the sake of it or whatever. But you really get the sense that, again, this guy doesn't want this woman reading this letter to think ill of him. It's like this thing of like, you're reading this letter and you're seeing my bad penmanship. You're looking at me and you're seeing my writing's ugly, right? You're looking at me and you're seeing my deeds are ugly. I don't want you to judge me, you know? And of course, if he felt judged, he would have wanted to take her eyeballs out too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also kind of, isn't that a mafia thing too? The removing of eyeballs. Yeah.
Well, in organized crime and in gang activity, which is where you do it for the sake of sending a message, like you cut a tongue out, and that's a way of saying like people who talk die. You cut the eyes out, like you didn't see a thing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It can have a symbolism. But with this guy, I think he was quite intelligent and yet so stupid that he was an imbecile. I mean, who would believe such a story? I mean, you understand what he's trying to claim. It's bizarre. I didn't do anything. I had an alibi for every murder. They basically found women who had died on the street. They had their eyes, then their eyes were pierced by something. Then the next thing you know, the eyeballs are missing. There's just a little tissue in there. And they're trying to say, I did it, when really what it was the morgue wanted to harvest and sell the eyeballs. And they've made my case more sensational than it is. I mean, therefore, I'm innocent. I have no idea what you're talking about. So the fact that he's had a lifelong preoccupation with eyeballs is just a coincidence.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't really believe in that sort of coincidence. Do you?
And do you think that the eyeballs had a sexual significance for him? I do.
Yeah, somehow, some way it had to, right?
If I had to guess, I mean, if you want me to be honest with you, I think he probably put the eyeballs down somewhere and he did things in front of them.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, that's the kind of depravity that we're talking about here. And I think that
Yes.
would lead us to our next
Oh,
series.
Lord.
It's going to take
Are
us
you
all.
getting tired, Josh, or are you okay to keep going a little while?
I'm
You want
ready.
to do a third one?
Of course. Do you?
Okay. Of course. I know, you know that I never get tired of meeting with the crowd here and talking about true crime. It's oh God, I can't even look at him. This is the worst serial killer in the history of Canada.
Yeah. So our neighbors up north here produced a pretty hideous one as well. But yeah, so here he is, Mr. Robert Pickton. Pickton?
Ugh. 49 victims. Disappointed that he didn't hit 50.
It's great.
He was a pig farmer. You remember I told you in the last show we did how much I hate cases that have to do with pigs. They just give me that motel hell vibe and they creep me out. There's something about the whole slaughterhouse abattoir kind of atmosphere that has too much of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre quality to it for my comfort.
Yeah.
And so it's just really he really sickens me.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about him. Somebody said
Of
lived
course.
right.
So read a little bit of his history
Well,
for
early
everybody
life
while
and criminal history. Robert Pickton was born on October 24th, 1949 to Leonard Francis Pickton and Louise Helene Arnold, a family of pig farmers in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, 17 miles east of Vancouver, or 27 kilometers. Pickton's older sister, Linda Louise Wright, was sent off to live with relatives in Vancouver as their parents thought that the pig farm would be inappropriate, an inappropriate setting to raise a young girl. Robert and his younger brother, David Francis Pickton, began working at the farm at an early age, and their mother was very demanding, prioritizing the pigs over the brothers' personal hygiene. That's great. And forcing them to work long hours raising the farm's livestock. Louise often sent the brothers to school in unwashed, dirty clothes, reeking of manure, and earning them the nickname Stinky Piggy from their classmates. Robert was so strongly attached to her and rarely interacted with his abusive father. He struggled in school. Being put in special class after failing grade 2. At the age of 12, he began raising a calf, which became his beloved pet. 2 weeks later, after not finding it after school, he was told to check the barn and was distraught to find it slaughtered. Pickton dropped out of school in 1963 and began working as a meat cutter. He continued to do so for nearly 7 years before leaving to work full-time at the farm. In 1978 and 1979, the parents died and the siblings inherited the pig farm, selling parts for about $5.6 million. Worker Bill Hiscock called the farm a creepy looking place patrolled by a 612-pound boar and described Pickton as pretty quiet guy, hard to strike up a conversation with. While occasional bizarre behavior, despite no evidence of substance abuse, would draw attention. Pickton became wealthy by selling parts of his farmland to property developers as the economy of the lower mainland grew exponentially in the 1980s and 1990s. He often hosted parties at at an ad hoc nightclub called Piggy's Palace, which attracted the political and economic elites of the lower mainland along with the Hells Angels. Starting in the 1990s, women in the lower mainland, most notably on the impoverished downtown east side of Vancouver, had started to go missing, leading to speculation in the media that a serial killer was operating. And the majority of the missing women were Indigenous women, women with substance use disorders, and sex workers. It's just a common theme that we see. On March 23rd, 1997, Pickton was charged with the attempted murder of a sex worker, Wendy Lynn Eistetter, who he had stabbed 4 times in an altercation at the farm. She told the police he'd handcuffed her and that she had escaped after suffering several lacerations. She told them she had disarmed him and stabbed him with his weapon. He sought treatment at Eagle Ridge Hospital while Eistetter recovered at the nearest emergency room. And Pickton was released on $2,000 bond, and the attempted murder charge against him was stayed on January 27th, 1998, because Eistetter had a drug problem issue, and prosecutors believed her to be too unstable for her testimony to secure a conviction. David was convicted of sexual assault in 1992, and he was fined $1,000 and given 30 days probation, and that the victim told the police that David had attacked her in his trailer at the pig farm, but she managed to escape. Robert had also been sued 3 times for traffic offenses. What were you going to say?
Nothing. I'm just horrified by the story. I mean, you have to picture it. It's very horror movie-like, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is.
It only gets worse.
Oh, yeah. The Pickton brothers were eventually sued by Port Coquitlam officials for violating zoning ordinances, neglecting the agriculture, which had led to be zoned, and having altered a large farm building on the land for the purpose of holding dances, concerts, and other recreations. They began to neglect the site's farming operation and registered a nonprofit charity, the Piggy's Palace Good Time Society, with the Canadian government in 1996. claiming to organize, coordinate, manage, and operate special events, functions, dances, shows, exhibitions on behalf of service organizations, sports organizations, and other worthy groups. Its events included raves and wild parties featuring Vancouver sex workers and gatherings um, in a converted slaughterhouse on the farm at 953 Dominion Avenue, the Port Qualum. These events attracted as many as 2,000 people, and members of the Hells Angels were known to frequent the farm. And just adding to the story, you know, I mean, it's just, you can imagine the scene. Subsequently, the Pickton brothers ignored growing legal pressure, shocker, and held a 1998 New Year's Eve party, after which they were faced with an injunction banning future parties. The police were authorized to arrest and remove any person attending future events at that farm. The society's nonprofit status was removed the following year for inability to provide financial statements. It was subsequently disbanded. An employee of Pickton found several purses belonging to the missing women of the downtown East Side and reported Pickton to the police. The police conducted 3 searches of the farm but found no evidence. In 1999, the police received a tip that Pickton had a freezer full of human flesh in his farmhouse, which the police ignored. And on February 6, 2002, police executed a search warrant for illegal firearms at the Pickton property. Both brothers were arrested, and police obtained a second warrant using what they had seen on the property to search the farm as part of the BC Missing Women investigation. Personal items.
Well, just to be clear, Josh, just because I want people to really understand what we're saying here, is that, first of all, you have a whole spate of Native women that vanish off the face of the earth, right? Now, you know that in the work I do with Ann Burgess and Victor Petreka at Boston College, one of the centers of our work is looking at crimes against Native Americans, missing indigenous people. That would include North America generally, you know, Canada. And also in the work of the Cold Case Foundation, there's this grant to go into the Native areas and teach about certain kinds of crimes and things, because there are different jurisdictions and different ways of conceptualizing these crimes. And so this is a people that is peoples that are very close to my heart, that I think great, you know, a very special place for me. And they were really preyed upon by this guy. So that's one really important point. And the second is that you have to understand that the reason they're not finding anything is because one of 2 things has happened. This guy, in some cases, it appears, was grounding up the bodies of women that had been brought there and assaulted. And in other cases, were just being fed to the pigs that were then killed and ground up. But one way or another, it led to the police in Canada having to warn people in supermarkets and elsewhere where this guy's meat products wound up that they might be eating people, that they might be eating human remains that were basically ground up like that into the, you know. And there was even one story I heard about him going to the supermarket and just standing there and watching people buy the packets. At one point, they took some stuff of his, like boots that he wore when walking through the mud and where the pigs were and everything, and they found the DNA of 2 women on his boots. You see what I'm saying? Like, just like from trudging through the mud, there was the remains of 2 women had left DNA on his boots. I mean, that should give you some kind of idea what we're dealing with here, right?
Well, I mean, look at that photo.
You mean how big the area is that they had to dig up and everything?
It's horrifying.
Yeah, it's horrifying. It is. It's very Sweeney Todd-like, as people are saying in the audience. Yes.
All right,
Exactly. Really, really disturbing stuff. And you know, the other thing is what he was doing with the victims, we can only get a sense of from some of the stuff they found in the house. You know, sex toys and weapons and whatever. a creepy recording and all this other stuff. And then during the trial, he came across as pretty out there. I mean, in the sense that his defense was he was some of his defenses were weird. Like, for example, they said to him, "What did you do with these victims? Was there a sexual component? Like, why would there be a rubber sex toy?" And he said, "Oh, that was just being used as a silencer on the revolver." Like, what? Like, what are you talking about? So there was that kind of quality to him of being pretty weird like that. I mean, you remember Michael Stone and I calculated that about 50% of these psychopathic serial killers were schizoid, right? Kind of detached, odd, etc. He was kind of like that. This was not a suave Ted Bundy serial killer. This is a guy that would have creeped you out and would have had no compunction at all about just like putting humans into devices that butcher them or anything like that. Absolutely no shame at all. This letter that I have from him is filled with creeptastic stuff like that. But on the back of it, he sends a tracing of his hand. You can see. Um, and it says, "This is my left hand." And it's very disturbing because the letter ends with this line. It says, "You take care of yourself, and until then, this is my left hand. Pleasant dreams."
What is that? What does that mean?
Oh, it's disturbing. And then
Pleasant dreams.
one of the things, I mean, it's creepy. And then one of the things that's really weird is that he's like sending this test to the recipient about farming. And it says, let me give you an example. Just to give you an idea how weird this is. It says, ingredients: whole wheat flour, water, unbleached wheat flour, yeast, sugar, vegetable oil, shortening, salt, calcium, propionate, sodium, I think it's pronounced sterol, to lactylate, mon and diglycerides caramel. And then it says, "What is it?" And then he says, you can like read down and you get the answer. It's whole wheat bread. Like, for some bizarre reason, he's showing off that as a farmer, he still remembers all the chemical ingredients in these different things that he used to sell. And for some reason, I don't know what the reason is, he feels the need to do that. And it's also interesting when you read the letter, you get a sense he isn't particularly intelligent. For example, he spells exam exam like that.
Well,
I
I
had
mean,
to take 2 courses, coarses. You know what I mean? He's not a very bright guy. He seemed like
yeah, well,
learning disabled or something.
yeah, that he was in special classes. I mean, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, there you are.
he dropped out pretty early. But yeah, this farm is just disgusting.
And what do we know about his childhood to justify some of this? What's the psychology of him?
Let's see here. I mean, other than his mother, forcing him to go to school smelling, and he was. It sounds like he was picked on, but
He was picked on, literally.
something
His name
about
was
that.
Willie Pickton. His name was Willie Pickton,
Yeah,
literally. Like, that's his name. Right.
Somebody, I think the calf has something to do with it.
Tell me.
Well, I mean, it was his pet when he was 12 years old. He came home and it was slaughtered, and he was devastated. And I think that he didn't have a lot of friends as it was anyway, and that was his. I'm sure he loved the animal.
Well, do you understand why he was isolated socially? What made him get isolated as a kid?
Is it because he
It
smelled?
had to do, yeah, because he worked with manure
Yeah.
in the farming world. So
Yeah.
as a consequence, he had a reputation for being somebody you didn't want to be around. He was certainly rejected by girls and all that. So there's this whole idea of like he was a disgusting, they viewed him as like repulsive, like he was a pig. So again, it's like, I'm not the pig, you're the pig, that kind of thing, right?
Right.
I mean, the symbolism of putting women into the mix with the pork is that you think they're pigs. I mean, clearly. I mean, I don't know how much more obvious it has to be. You
No,
put them in the dirt because you think they're dirt. I mean, it's like a complete, dismissal of the humanity of these people. And it tells you something about how he would have felt. The fact that he chose people who were socially invisible tells you that he felt socially invisible. That kind of thing, right? So you want to bear that in mind. He was a schizoid guy, meaning that he would have chosen solitary activity. But at some point, I think he would have been a little hurt by people rejecting him and all that. You see
yeah,
what I'm saying?
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, listen
What
to
else
here.
do you?
This is
Yeah.
personal items belonging to missing women were found, which was sealed off by members of the RCMP, Vancouver Police Department Task Force. The following day, Pickton was charged with weapons offenses. Both Picktons were later released as Robert was kept under police surveillance. On February 22nd, 2002, Robert Pickton was arrested again and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Serena Abotsway and Monica Wilson. And on April 2nd, 3 more charges were added for the murders of Jacqueline McDonnell, Diane Rock, and Heather Bottomley. A 6th for the murder of Andrea Jonesbury, who laid on April 9th, followed shortly by a 7th, Brenda Wolf. And on September 20th, 4 more were added from 4 more were added: Georgina Pappin, Patricia Johnson, Helene Hallmark, and Jennifer Firminger. Another
It
4.
goes on and on, Josh, because
Yeah.
he was annoyed that he couldn't hit 50.
Well, here it brought the total to 27. But another thing, the excavations continued on the farm. The cost of the investigation was estimated to have been $70 million by the end of 2000.
Isn't that unbelievable? Think about it. And think about how somebody who was invisible socially has now forced everyone to pay attention to him. You know, to me, Josh, the most important story in his whole life is something that happens in I think when he's 17, which actually has to do with his brother. And the incident is that the brother is sort of driving along in bad weather and runs the car into a 14-year-old boy. And they take their mom to the scene. He takes his mother to the scene of where this kid is dying in the road from having been hit. And instead of reporting it to the police, the mother puts the kid into like a ditch. And he dies in the ditch. And then when they do an autopsy, they find that he didn't die from getting hit by the car. He wandered into some water and drowned. And that story is very important to understand the formation of this budding serial killer, right?
Right.
That at the end of the day, like there was this kind of deception, this cover up. And by the way, it was on the part of a female figure, which is important also. But the idea is that even his mother had no sympathy for this boy, just according to the story, right? And that's important to think about in terms of how that would have been interpreted in the psychology of this kid. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean,
Just think about what he's soaking in, right? Women don't like him because he smells. His mother, participated in basically covering up a hit and run, and the kid dies horribly. The slaughter of animals with no compunction whatsoever. I mean, you got to picture the kind of kid this would, and he might have been somebody who had something going on that was developmental or psychiatric or IQ related or whatever. He's kind of impressionable, and so you got to put this whole soup together, and it becomes a very disturbing case. And there was an obsessional quality to him where there's this whole like committing the crime and then sort of like getting rid of even the most minute evidence of it by feeding it to the animals and like undoing it. And the other thing that has an obsessional quality is the fact that he wanted a very specific number, that he was bothered that he couldn't hit 50 has always been interesting to me. It suggests a schizoid obsessional guy and somebody with sexual perversions and very intense anger towards women, who viewed women literally as swine.
Yeah. Let's see. The gay guy, is that how you refer to your friends? It was totally inappropriate. Yeah, sorry. I didn't know that. I didn't know
Except
that
that,
I didn't know that was inappropriate.
well, I think, Josh, that what you meant was that you view it as having so little judgment associated with it that you just meant it the way a person might say the sky is blue. Like you were just using it as a descriptor. But
Yeah.
I think, it could be interpreted by someone the wrong way. But I think you meant, I know how you meant it, because I know you don't have any judgment towards individuals that
Sure.
choose
I mean,
choose
I'm
the,
not gonna get riled up by anything like that. Let me see here. Yeah, and if you look at the pictures of him, I mean, he's quite literally a pig himself.
well, that's certainly what people said about him.
I mean,
You know what I mean? And did you see the picture of him where he has the pig hoisted up on the chains?
no,
Ugh,
I didn't.
I hate that picture.
No,
Yeah. You know how he died, by the way, right?
no, I have no idea. Did somebody kill him?
He was killed by an inmate.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, but I did not know that.
Yeah, it wasn't even a year ago. He died in May of 24, the last day of May in 2024. And I have the envelope of the letter says that he was in he was in British Columbia in jail. He was actually, it's interesting, at the time of this letter, he was in the North Fraser Pre-Trial Center. So it's interesting that in the middle of being pre-trial, he would be sending nonsensical letter where he's proving that he knows
You had a
everything
letter
about
from him?
farm. Yeah, that's the one I was showing with his hand.
Yeah, the where he wrote that to you?
No, that letter was written to somebody that I know who gave it to me.
Crazy.
Yeah, for
That's
research.
That
But yeah,
what did that
it was
symbolize?
a pretty sick boy.
Does
What'd
that
you say,
symbolize
Josh?
anything? Does his hand symbolize anything? Like, why did he?
Well, I
Why
think
did?
sending your hand and saying pleasant dreams, especially given that it was to a woman, he was writing to a woman, is very disturbing. I mean, this is a sex offender. This is a guy who used his hands to kill people, by asphyxiation and other means and things like that. So sending your hand is like a symbol of power. You know what I mean? It's like I have things here where killers trace their hand and they say things like, "This hand has killed," like that. I have a letter, I think here from Joseph Druce, who was a guy who, I think that was his name, Joseph Druce, who, I want to double check that, but who killed people that he thought were perverts, like
Yeah.
sort of like a Dexter figure. And he wrote, "These hands took action," that kind of thing. There's a lot of that, the tracing of the hands, and because they're symbols of power, the power that you assert over a life and all that kind of thing. So,
He's
now, but think about it, Josh. If somebody accuses you of being a pig, of being sloppy and out of control,
happened before.
wouldn't you compensate by feeling that you had everything in hand, that you were in total control? It's the opposite of being a pig.
Who,
If a
me?
pig lives out in the mud, right? It's the opposite of the hand. Everything's in control. It's like a compensation for feeling sloppy
Well, that yeah, and I
and
see
out of
people
control.
saying pigs are cute,
Yeah.
pigs are intelligent. They are. They're also filthy, but that's just their nature. And so
Well,
that's
the only reason that they have to be in the mud is because they don't have sweat pores. They have to cool down.
right.
That's all. They don't like the mud because they like being disgusting. But they have to be in the mud to cool down, or they'll overheat. The truth of the matter is, pigs are actually quite intelligent.
No question about that.
Yeah.
That's
In Animal Farm, they're the leaders, right? I mean, they're very, very intelligent creatures. The truth of the matter is, I'm not going to lie to you. I actually think pigs are cute, especially baby pigs.
of course they are.
Did you ever see a baby pig?
Yeah.
Like, if you ever spend time with a baby pig, you won't be able to eat pork.
I
They're
like
too cute. But they're too cute.
I'm
They
gonna
really
switch.
are.
I
They're
think I'm switching
adorable.
to turkey bacon from now on.
Well,
I don't like
turkeys are about the yeah, I mean, they're living creatures too,
Yeah,
but it's
but I
just
was
like,
attacked
if
by
you ever
one.
touch a baby pig, oh my god, with that little down that they have on them and the
I
little
was
noise they
attacked
make, it's really hard.
I was attacked by a turkey on my front porch.
I need to hear about this. Tell me about this story.
So I was getting this was probably 2017, 18. I live sort of near a green belt, and there was this enormous ass bird on my lawn. And so it was like 8 in the morning. I walked out and I was like, oh my God, look, it's a turkey. And I was like, hi, little turkey. And like I started to walk towards my car, and the friggin' thing like puffed up and went, ah! And like came after me. And I had to run from the damn thing into the house, shut the door, looking out the window, and it wouldn't let me come out of the house for like 20 minutes till it left.
Because you came at it. It
Well,
was defending itself, in other words.
it was on my property. I was defending myself. And he's lucky that I
Mm.
didn't have a spear, or I would have yeeted it at him.
Mm. But would you kill a pig?
No,
Those cute little faces they
no,
have and a little snout. I mean, it is interesting
absolutely
that
not.
yeah, and you know, in some faiths, of course, you can't eat them because there's association with dirtiness and the whole thing. But you know, I just think the whole idea that story, by the way, horrified me.
Which
But
one?
because you have to remember that story you told about the turkey, because you know you got to remember that birds, you know, descend from like a whole branch of the dinosaur family tree, right? And it's very disturbing to think that they were lizards once. It's very creepy. You know, those were the ornithischian dinosaurs, right? The ones that turned into modern birds. And there are some little creatures that we have today that descend from them also, like house cats. The whole
Yeah,
hypothesis that once upon a time they were little lizards. It's why they go so crazy when you throw string around because it's like they're going after a fly.
yeah, I was terrified. I mean,
Yeah,
they're absolutely scary creatures.
they
Uh,
really are. But what did you out of these three offenders? I mean, when you hear about these cases, doesn't it strike you that um, we don't have cases like that anymore?
yeah, why is that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's because DNA technology and things like that make it that people are getting caught before they could kill a second time. And that's why I think it's so interesting that just as serial killing declines in the late 90s, mass murder increases with Columbine on. And I think it's because with mass murder, you can emote and get it all out of your system at once instead of you know, because with serial killing, you're going to get caught. But and yet they're totally different personalities, right? A serial killer is more fantasy based, usually sexually motivated and all that. Whereas a mass murderer is more like somebody who lacks emotional coping skills in the face of loss or some horrendous life event that has been humiliating or emasculating or whatever. And totally different.
I
And
think it
yet
was
that has become the crime du jour, huh? Hmm? Damn
yeah, no,
rabbit turkey. Yeah.
and
Is that Josh's decapitated head next to the turkey? I think so. It looks like the little turkey has plucked it off, and
dude,
you
that
know,
thing was
like
so it was
champagne cork.
yeah, and I think that's the nature. Birds can be awfully mean. Like they're just very aggressive creatures, and you know, it wouldn't be the first time that I've ever been pecked at by a bird. That's for sure. Got bit by
Really?
a
You've been
parrot
pecked?
once.
I'm sorry, you've been pecked at by birds?
Yeah.
The things we learn about you, Josh, you're like an onion that just keeps like we take away the layers, and it's just more. You're more and more filled with horrifying animal stories.
I've had all kinds of interactions with animals.
You have your inside of you is a menagerie of demonic animals that have tortured you. I mean, it's just very interesting. I don't know why they're all animal stories. Animals tend to like me. I mean, they don't pluck me or
Yeah, I bet this
scream
turkey
at
wouldn't
me
like.
or
I guarantee it.
what? The turkey wouldn't like me?
No, no, this turkey
Oh,
was not for the world.
probably not. Probably not.
They're very
So,
mean.
what did you think about what did you think about the idea, Josh, of talking about these more obscure killers? Did you learn anything?
I think they're fascinating. The only one that I knew a little bit about was the um I
The
did know
eyeball killer?
I didn't know much about him. I actually did know a little bit about Pickton, but that was a but he once again he's one of those stories that people don't really like to cover because he's nuts. But I think it's a great
It's so
idea.
disgusting. Well, I think it's I mean, we're talking about it for educational purposes. You see what I mean? I mean, it's not like we're sitting here, enjoying these horrible stories. I think it's that we're going into this kind of darkness to learn about it and the psychology of these people. Now, I did think, because I mean, I have a little time if you do. I love when we do the calls. I don't know if you want to maybe let people call in for a few minutes. You want to do a couple of calls?
Yeah, I don't
I know
mind.
people love when we do them. People are still teasing you about that camel story in the chat.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
may have been one of the funniest things I've ever heard you say, but I've heard you say some pretty funny things, but that was out there.
I was out there. Thank you.
It was pretty out there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it
Well,
was-
at
Oh,
35 years old, writing the story of the dromedaries that brought the kings to Jesus, it was pretty out there. But I liked it. I like things that are like off the beaten path.
very obscure. I know that.
I don't know. Let's see. I just want to see if there's any questions we missed as you're pulling up the chat, the call-in thing. And
Jake
people can ask questions about anything they want.
wants to know:
What?
are you calling gay people pigs or piglets? I'm not answering.
What?
I'm not
That
answering.
doesn't even make sense.
I'm not
There was
answering.
no point in the conversation in which there was even a linkage
I
made
don't
between
even know how.
discussion
I
of
don't know where the bridge was. I really don't. I mean, that's offensive to me, to be honest with you. But I don't want to go into it. That's ridiculous.
but I don't even see how that anything you
That's
said
why
could
it's
have been
offensive.
construed that way. Why don't you make a blanket statement right now to knock out any such statements like that you don't have any issue whatsoever?
No, I don't want
Sexuality.
I don't want to do that either. Because it's I don't know where that came from. It's ridiculous. All right,
Let's
so
put it this way. I just think that whatever it is you believe about what people are doing, morally, spiritually, psychologically, whatever, I just think it's not our job to be judgmental of people. If you're trying to convince somebody of something where you think you have a kind of moral superiority over them and you want to kind of talk to them about it or whatever, you're certainly not going to pull them to yourself by being cruel to them. You know what I mean? I just don't believe that it's ever useful to judge people like that. Never. I just don't like to do it. I just think it's also hypocritical of any human being to judge anybody for anything. I mean, not one of us has all of our marbles in the box. I
well,
mean,
I
how
just
could I criticize anybody for anything? You know what I mean? Are you kidding?
yeah,
Don't you feel like that? I mean, I think both of us are not really judgmental for
of
that
course,
reason. We're human.
yeah, of course I do. It's just it's weird. I don't know. I get it.
Silly. So I don't know. That question is
Guys,
depressing
my
to me that
friend.
somebody could think that that's what you were saying.
He's
But
my
anyway,
friend.
all right. So let's. I think it was a troll, to be honest with you. Okay. So do you want to? Have you opened the line up?
Let's see. The link is pinned at the top. We'll do one at a time. And you know,
I love these calls. Because I really feel like we sometimes get a chance to say things to people that really affect their lives. I've gotten such beautiful letters from people that I've had conversations with on here that have followed up by either emailing or sending me a letter, and some of them are very powerful. I keep them.
let me see here. Okay, so
Ellie,
yeah,
no, no, I don't.
the link is pinned at the top. And
Ellie, you've got to see me when I get into a cycle of sleeping very badly because I'm writing a book or something like that, and I'm basically staying awake on a caffeine drip. I look kind of like an electrocuted pigeon with the twitchy eyes and the kind of terrified, it's scary stuff. But
And
yes,
you said that
definitely, I sleep too little.
the link that is pinned there, you'll be voice only. Nobody will see your face. Like I said, even if you wanted to show it, it's not happening. So it's nothing more than a call in. You don't have to turn your camera on. So yeah, feel free to
Remember, we can't give advice. Like, this is not a therapeutic thing. But thank you. That was very nice of you to say. The person who said I have a beautiful soul. I mean, I appreciate that. But
Hi Brenda. How are you?
reminds me of Brenda's on.
No,
Is that Brenda?
no, nobody's on.
Brenda Chick. That's such a cool name.
Been around a while too.
I like that. Can somebody please call in?
Yeah, we got it right here.
We'd appreciate it.
We got one. D, how are you?
I'm great. How you guys doing?
Oh, we're doing great. Thank you.
I have a question for Dr. Gary. Why is
Oh,
it
good.
that some people, their childhood affects them? Because I had a pretty traumatic childhood myself. And with some people, it affects them in a way, this negative way, where they become serial killers. They become those kind of people. And then other people like myself, I go the exact opposite. I'm a very caring, loving, forgiving person. What makes that happen? I don't understand it, because like I said, I'm a very loving, giving, caring person. I'm very non-judgmental. I'm pretty happy-go-lucky. And then there's people that's had the same things happen to them that end up turning into these awful human beings. And I would just like to
Well,
understand that.
yeah. Did you do a kind charitable thing today? Did you do something today that you think kind of exemplifies what you mean when you say that you're a loving person? And I like to hear stories like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm every day I do something giving, loving, caring every single day.
That's beautiful.
So
Give me an example
yeah.
of the kind of thing you mean, because
Um
I'm trying to make. But like, give me an example. What kinds of things do you get to do?
okay. Well, I'm a crocheter. Okay, I have my own crochet channel here on YouTube. And I spend most of my time on my channel giving things away to people that I feel like maybe they can't afford yarn or they don't have the talent. So I make things and give it away.
Mm.
People
I love
that,
it.
yeah, people that need advice. I'm always giving advice. Things like that. I mean, that's just today. I could give you many examples of other things other than just crochet related,
What is your
but
channel?
these creative hands
Yeah,
crochet.
Make sure
you saw Dee's photo earlier of her
Yeah,
surrounded by
Yeah.
all the women.
get the official channel name.
Yeah, it's D's
Yeah, what's your
Creative
channel
Hands.
called?
D's Creative Hands Crochet. That's the name of my channel. And like I was saying, that's just one aspect. Like for instance, if you're broke down on the side of the road, I'm the one to help you. Your car needs fixed and you're broke, I'm gonna help you. I could just go on and on. I've just always been a very helpful, giving, loving, caring person. And I also don't judge people. That's another thing. I'm very non-judgmental on my channel and on real life. I don't care as long as you're not hurting kids and animals and things like that. I'm good with you. You know what I'm saying?
What if
I'm
the
very open-minded. What's that?
what if a turkey attacks you unsolicited and you got to defend yourself? Is that
Well,
okay?
you got to defend yourself. That's a different story, Josh.
Good enough. Just
Yeah.
making sure.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm also
Well,
I'm also Native American. We hunt turkeys. Okay,
Oh,
so
fascinating. Oh, but we were just talking earlier about which tribal group do you come from?
I'm 3/4 Cherokee. and I'm a quarter
Oh,
Irish. That's where I get the red hair and the green eyes from. I get it all from the Irish side, but the rest of my family's all dark skin, dark hair, dark eyes, you know. But yeah, I'm
fascinating.
Cherokee. Yeah. And matter of fact,
Fasc-
I heard what you were saying about all the deaths of the indigenous people and the
Oh,
fact
yeah.
that you're a part of a group helping that. And in the chat, I did thank you for that because we appreciate that.
Oh, we're very.
And
It's a. You know, it's there by some estimates, 95% of crime against Native Americans is not reported.
yes, I know that. I
It
belong
doesn't
to the American
doesn't
Indian
sell.
movement. So, yeah, I
Oh,
belong to the
very good.
American Indian movement. So I'm very, very much involved. So, yes,
Yeah.
I understand it completely. But like I was saying earlier, I just, I listen, I'm
Yeah.
a true crime fanatic. Okay. I'm always on watching true crime as I crochet or dye yarn or the things that I do
Hmm.
for my channel. And more
Yeah.
so than I watch other crochet channels, which probably ticks people off. But
Right.
anyways, what I was saying is, I don't understand, because like I said, I had a pretty hard childhood and teenagerhood and so on. I was a mother at 15, so on and so on. But I just don't understand how, some people's minds go this way with trauma and other people's minds go that way with trauma. Like, what differentiates between the
Let
two?
me put it to you like this. What you're picking up on is that the negative experiences a person has are not in and of themselves causal of going out and committing these kind of crimes, because in the same family you can have two people affected by the same crime, let's say, or horrors of their parents, and one of them goes out and does violent things, the other one doesn't. Remember, for example, Norman Mailer's The Executioner's Song, which is really talks about two family members where one of them is a serial killer and one isn't, right? Where that are affected by the same home environment. Well, what is that about? Well, it implies is that there has to be another factor, which is that you have to have some kind of genetic or biological component that can go two different directions. It can go in a good direction or a bad direction depending upon how you're treated. So my hypothesis has always been that a psychopath, for example, is somebody who probably has some inborn aspects, like being kind of flat and bored and empty, or sensation seeking, or unafraid, or whatever. But if they're treated well, they might go out and do something pro-social with that, like throw themselves on a grenade to save people or run into burning buildings or whatever. And if they're treated badly, they might apply those things in an antisocial way. There are other people that don't have a psychopathic brain, they have a normal brain, and then they're traumatized by their experiences. And so they wind up with a hyperactive limbic system that is more prone to being worried about other people. The more hyperactive your limbic system is, the more you're going to be an empath. You're going to be somebody who cares about other people. You're going to be the kind of person who would run out of the fire and then run back in to save the people in the fire, the other people in the fire, right? And as a matter of fact, I was talking earlier about Abby Marsh and her book on altruism, and one of the points I think she makes in there is that in studies of people who donate organs to strangers, they have larger amygdalas. They have in other words, this sort of fear center in the brain is larger in those people. Why? Because they're people whose worry is so intense that they don't just worry about themselves, they worry about other people too. Whereas a psychopath has a kind of absent or hypoactive, underactive limbic circuitry where nothing disturbs them. They could butcher a person and feel nothing. And so I always
Now,
think of people
do you think that
right.
some people, when they suffer trauma or have some bad things that happen in their life, do you think that that causes mental illness as well, that would cause that person to become a negative, influence on
Well,
the world?
if there was some, just
I
like you're
just had
saying
throat
about
surgery, so I apologize
oh,
for my voice. I'm having
oh,
trouble with my throat. So
are you okay?
Oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. I have polyps
Good.
removed and
I
that kind of stuff.
suspect that the world is more interesting with you in it, so make sure you're okay, Dee. I think
Thank you. I
the
appreciate
idea
that.
is that, well, anybody who devotes their life to crocheting has to be a special person in my book. But and turns it into a charity, top it off. But I think that just like I was saying about psychopathy, if you have an underlying genetic predisposition, for example, to mental illness, trauma can bring that out, as opposed
Okay.
to somebody who, I mean, it can bring it out. It can bring out anything. But the most important thing is to pay attention to how people react to something. It's not what happens to them, it's how they handle it, right? So you think about, for example, 20 people are laid off from a job. Most of them are pretty bummed out, but they know they'll get another job. One of them becomes extremely depressed. One of them goes out and commits a mass shooting. You see what I'm saying? In other words,
Right. Right.
totally different reactions because there's an interaction between the experience and the person's capacity to kind of deal with it and the particular genetics. And it's very important that I clarify that I'm not implying any kind of victim blaming there. I'm not. I'm saying that sometimes trauma can get to such a point that it's too much for anyone. And the thing about
That's true. Yeah.
trauma is that is so painful about trauma is that it robs you of so much. That because it makes your brain so afraid that you then generalize to the stimulus. So like for example, if I touch the stove and I get burned, I'm going to have a fear reaction touching any stove, not just that stove. If I
Right.
have been assaulted by one person, I'm going to think all people are dangerous. Or if I was at war and I heard bombs go off, I might jump at the sound of a car backing up because I think it's a bomb.
You
In
know,
other words, the
when I
brain
was younger,
generalizes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. When I was younger, I think it affected me worse. Like I would say in my early 20s or so. And it really messed with my head quite a bit to the point where I went to see a therapist. And
Uh-huh.
the therapist, well, I went to
Everybody
therapy
should.
because I thought it was necessary. So
Mhm.
the therapist and I actually got to be very good friends. But she had told me at one point, she said, like I said, we became friends. So this is kind of off
Yeah.
off the cuff kind of thing she said to me. But she said, you know what, Dee? She said, people that have gone through the things that you have went through generally become drug addicts or alcoholics or abusive or prostitutes or she gives me this big long list of all these things and she says, and the fact that you are the person you are is amazing to me. And so I felt very proud at that moment. You know what I'm saying? Like, wow, that's
It is
awesome.
amazing.
That,
It is amazing
yeah, that
because
I
it's
was very proud,
it's a choice. Yeah.
considering what I had been through, and whatever. But I never understand. Like I said, I've read your book. I'm waiting for the next one.
Oh, what'd you think?
Uh, oh my gosh, incredible, incredible.
Oh,
Your
you should write
mind,
a
your
review. You
mind.
write a review.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, your mind is just so awesome. I love your mind. And
Okay.
Josh, you amaze me as well. I really, really enjoy the two of you.
Thank you.
And whenever I get my notification that you guys are on, I don't care what time it
Well,
is, I'm watching. So,
Thank you.
well,
yeah. So,
I'm very proud of you because, I have to tell you that some of the most beautiful people that I've ever known in my life are people who make a decision, which I think has a very Christ-like quality to it, actually, who make a conscious decision to be more loving to people than people have been to them. And
yeah, I
when people do
I
that,
did exactly that. I
yes, I
thought
know.
to myself,
I can hear it.
I am never going to be like the people that I was around. I'm never
Yeah.
ever going to make anyone feel this way or, abuse them this way, whatever. I don't want to get into all that, but
But
you know, I would
isn't that
never.
beautiful? It's so beautiful what you're saying, because what you're saying is abuse is like a chain that just keeps passing on, and somebody finally
It
says
does.
the buck is going to stop with me. I'm going to
Yep.
take somebody is going to give me abuse, and I'm going to give back crocheting. You know, and when you do something like that, what you're basically saying is, I don't need justice. Love is higher than that.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And
You know, it's like I'm
you think,
listening to this about that pink guy, whatever, I don't know how to say his last name, the pig guy, okay? I'm listening to,
uh,
to you guys talk about him. And, you know, Josh is talking about how, the traumatic thing with his calf, you know, that he loved his
oh,
calf and then he came home and it was slaughtered. Okay, that his mother was not a clean person and sent him to school stinky. Well, I went through way worse than that. And I would never even, I mean, it boggles my mind. I would never even consider hurting another human being. And I went through way, way worse than the pig dude. Do you know what I'm saying? I just don't, I don't know, man. I just don't
yeah.
understand sometimes. It's
Well,
very confusing
because
to
so
me.
much of life comes down to choices. That's the whole thing. When we get into all these biological explanations or whatever, we're missing the point that at the end of the day, these are not psychotic people. Only 0.06% of serial killers have psychosis, according to the serial killer database. Most of
True.
these are
Yeah.
people who know exactly what they're doing. They know the difference between right and wrong, and they make a choice. And if you think about it, that's true even in terms of happiness, is that everything boils down to a perspective. It's all a perspective. And, like Robert Louis Stevenson said, two men looked out through prison bars. One saw mud, the other stars.
Yeah.
It's a
It's just
perspective.
yeah, that's very interesting. I just have always wondered that. Like, you know, like I said, I went through way worse than the pig guy. You know, how come I think about life so much better than and not wouldn't even no way do the things that these people do. It's just so strange to me. It's like, you know, what sends them over the edge, you know? But like you were saying, you know, some has to do with mental illness, some may have to, you know, I don't know. I chose the better route, I guess. I don't know. But
You did,
you
and
know,
we have to unfortunately go, but it's such a joy to talk to you, and I really want to tell you that it's very inspirational to meet people who are coming on here and telling the whole audience about um, having been abused. I mean, that's the word you're using, right?
right.
Traumatized, I think is the word you used.
Yes.
And
Both actually.
well, I mean, it was
Yeah.
implied in what you were saying that
Right, right.
and who makes a choice to be more loving to people than people have been to them. And I think that's a very good example of real strength. We are living in a time, and I'm not going to get specific on what I mean here, but all you have to do is peruse the news of the last week, and you will see
Right.
examples of people who think that they are strong because they're jerks and are mean to people.
Right.
And what I'm trying to tell you is, like, we need more people that remind people that strength has to do with the greatness of one's love. I am convinced, absolutely convinced, that in the end, the one who loves the most wins.
D, thank you so
Okay?
much for
Yes.
calling in. I
I'm
appreciate
sorry to me to
It-
talk so long. It was just
no,
very
no, no.
interesting
It's
to
very
me.
important. It's
it's
very important.
that's
And
that is
thank you so much for the call. You keep being you. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh and Dr. Gary, for having me.
thank you.
And
Appreciate
I'll
You're so
continue
welcome.
to watch the two of you. You really are an interesting group.
thank
So
you. We
thank you
Thank
so
appreciate
you.
much.
thank you, D. Bye.
Yes, Kate, we can talk about Bittaker. He was actually pen pals with Michael Stone and hauled us from prison when we did the New Evil. I have a great deal to say about that piece of work. Do we have somebody on the call
I
on the
sure
line,
do.
Nathaniel?
Let's see
I've been
here.
waiting a long time. I feel sorry about that.
That's all right.
What
Whitney,
what a nice caller D is, though.
Whitney, go ahead. You're on the air. You there, Whitney?
She passed out from the weight.
All right, let's try this one.
You there?
Let's go to that.
Aw. She like went to the restroom. She came back and missed it. It's terrible.
Go ahead. Where are you calling from?
Oh.
Hold on. Go ahead. Where are you calling from?
You have to, the house
Is my voice there or am I losing it? I heard a little like blah, 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 blah. Is there somebody there?
yeah, it's a little bit.
Yeah.
What does that sound?
It's the connection's bad. Hold on.
Falling in from Ouija boards again.
Oklahoma. Can you hear me?
No, I really can't. I can't hear you. Unfortunately, it's very choppy. Here, let's go back here. Maybe if you get in a better reception area, I'll keep you there. But let me just go to back here. Okay, Whitney, go ahead. You're on the air. Your mic's muted, so you're gonna have to unmute to talk. I can't unmute you.
Hello, can you hear me?
I sure can. How are you?
Okay, I'm good. I'm sorry, I apologize. I actually typed in my question because I have my little son sleeping
Okay.
next to me, so I have my earbuds in, but I just snuck into the other room really quick.
Oh, well, we can, I see it right here. We can, if you need to go, we can talk about it.
So my question is for Dr. Gary, but I just wanted to say, Josh, I give you all the credit in the world for becoming such a positive influence and sharing your story and your experiences. I think it's super brave, and I give you all the credit in the world.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Dr. Gary, I am like oddly not obsessed, but I can't wait for the Kohlberger trial just because the buildup to all of this has just been like, I feel like there's just something new every day. Wanted to get your take on if you had the opportunity to sit with Brian in an interview room, what would be some of the questions that you would ask him and why, outside of like, introductions and names and things like that? And my second question is, do you think there's any truth to the autism thing that's recently come out of that he's autistic? And obviously I know that doesn't mean that you commit murders, but just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that. And I am in Charleston, South Carolina. I listen to you guys whenever you're on.
A beautiful state.
Yeah.
I love the Carolina.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a lot to say about this, and I'm going to be very careful about what I say because the audience for the Kohlberger case is a very intense one that will take any little thing that you say and blow it up.
Right.
So I'm going to keep this to a minimum. I would say first and foremost that if I ever do get the opportunity to talk to Kohlberger, if he is guilty, that is, because we want to be fair to somebody that is undergoing trial.
Of course.
I think the questions that I would want to ask him would be the questions that he posed to killers in his survey, because I believe that that was a kind of self-study. In other words, the curiosity about what drove killers and what they feel when they do it. If he is somebody that is on the spectrum, I could see him being somebody that would be so curious about the intellectual experience of doing something that he would want to try it himself and kind of get the phenomenological experience. For example, it reminds me of the man who studied insect bites, who created a scale of how much it hurt to be stung by different insects, and wasn't satisfied until he actually allowed himself to be bitten by the insects so that he could know what they felt like. And then the scale will say things like blinding pain, terrible burning, things like that, because phenomenologically it was important to experience it himself. But so I think that you get a hint of the kinds of things that he'd want to talk about if he's guilty, and what it is he wanted to know from other people. And I think regarding the autism thing, I'm gonna sort of defer to the people that are assessing him on that,
Sure.
because it's an open case. But what I will say is this: if you have ever seen the profile that I did of the Idaho killer before Brian was even arrested, you remember that one of the things have you seen that? Have you ever seen
I
that
have,
profile
yeah.
I did? Yeah,
Yes, I've actually watched it
and
a couple times because I feel like I learn something new every time because
yeah,
your mind is just amazing. And
well,
any chance I get, I kind of rewatch it. But I'm just horrified by the whole thing. It's just so sad. So, and
yeah, yeah. Well, knife
in my
killings,
mind,
especially. Yeah,
is this
yeah.
like a legal strategy or is there something,
Well,
to
yeah.
be said about all of that as well?
Well. Let me put it like this. If you saw that profile, you know that one of the things I said was that whoever did this, I imagined led a very restricted, mechanical, avoidant existence,
Right,
and was a person who I suspected, if things got a little bit out of control, could be explosive and hold a grudge and that kind of thing. So I had always been picturing somebody that was going to be very mechanical and rigid, right? Like that kind of a personality. And we
right,
don't know exactly what could cause that. It can be caused by anything from something developmental, like autism, to something like a personality disorder, right? But the most
right,
important thing to remember is that autism is not really a mitigating thing, in the sense that, or it could be argued that it isn't, in the sense that, first of all, autistic people are almost never violent.
right,
The reality is that even if someone has an autism diagnosis, how does that explain or justify or mitigate murder?
right,
Well, first of all, in my experience, which is extensive in working with autistic people, they have a tendency not only to know the difference between right and wrong, but to have an almost rigid morality. The kind of person who, would have to walk a penny back to the store because they were overpaid in change, because it would be like you were explaining it away, but at the end of the day, I'm keeping this person's penny. It's more meticulous, obsessional morality. A person, if you ask them an opinion and you say, "What do I look like in this outfit?" They can't lie, even to
yeah,
spare your feelings. So they say,
right,
"The truth is, you look ugly. You look ugly in
right,
that dress. You look
right,
ugly in that outfit." It's like a kind of extreme honesty, extreme awareness of the difference between right and wrong. So that my sense is that autism certainly doesn't mitigate in the sense of taking away one's, understanding of right and wrong, like you'd see in an insanity defense. It certainly doesn't, reduce culpability. It certainly, I mean, what's the point of it? To create sympathy that somebody was
right,
weird interpersonally and had these ideas, not because they were a mean person, but simply because they were sort of odd and didn't interpret cues correctly. But
right,
then there's this other piece of it that bothers me, which is, it's thought that Koberger wrote on the internet about all his different problems, and he doesn't mention autism,
right. Yeah, true.
visual snow, depression. Yeah. Where's the autism?
But is it possible that it's just a defense strategy? Because I mean, I think
Of
that's what they're
course.
doing just to get
Of
the death
course.
penalty lower.
That's what I'm saying. But what I'm trying to say is, how does it mitigate anything? It doesn't suggest that you don't know the difference between right and wrong. Quite the contrary. And it certainly doesn't suggest that like you're some kind of sympathy story, because, the reality is that, this is somebody who, if he has it, would be the high functioning type who is getting a
Right,
PhD and all of that. So where's the suffering? Well, I suppose it would be interpersonal difficulties and things like that. But anyone who knew him, if you talk to people who knew him, he was sort of like an insufferable know-it-all,
right,
a kind of and misogynistic and condescending, a control freak, that kind of thing. Not a person that was saying things that had an autistic quality in the sense of peculiar and kind of interested in very circumscribed areas and all of that, but and interested in more solitary activity. This is more a person that was interpersonally kind of nasty and
Right.
controlling and all of that.
Right.
And I find look, I don't want, I cannot diagnose him. He might be somebody who meets criteria for that. I don't know. But I don't know how it would explain or motivate a crime. The truth of the
Right.
matter is that autistic people are among the most harmless of all. Now, I will say this. When someone has other features, like they're a psychopath, in addition to having autistic features, then what you can see is that the autism adds a flavor to the murderous quality or the criminality, where the person can have a very detached, mechanical, scientific quality, like somebody like Robert Burdella that could make study books as he was torturing people because he was experimenting with them. He's somebody that I've always wondered about him if he had spectrumy traits in addition to being a psychopath and a sex offender, so that it adds a little something to the
Yeah.
mix, but it certainly didn't cause it. He was a
Right.
psychopath. So Burdella was
Right.
a psychopath. So and a sex offender. So I think, if it's present, it's in addition to something else.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
therefore I think I would not hang my hat on that, as
Right.
a this is the
Right.
cause, or this is let's feel sorry for somebody or whatever. Now, that having been said, whether that diagnosis is present or not, I don't know. The diagnosis, if it was made, could have been made after he was arrested, and a
Yeah.
psychologist or somebody went in there to evaluate, and that's why it's not mentioned online. That's possible. But okay, I mean, how is it a defense strategy? I mean, I'm curious. Let's say you were in a jury and you were faced with this. Would you have sympathy for somebody accused of a quadruple murder,
Well,
because the person had high functioning autism? You
no,
think that explained it? Right.
no, and a big reason why I'm kind of intrigued by this is I actually work in early intervention, so I actually work
Oh,
with.
good.
Yeah, so
Wonderful.
I have a caseload of many, many children who are on the spectrum, and it almost like irritated me that this was like a new strategy, like coming out, or like you said, I don't know if it's a real diagnosis or not. Some people had said that, he's trying now to not have the death penalty because, Idaho doesn't, I guess, something about like that maybe they would take mercy and take that off of the table if it was like an autism thing. But, to me,
I
that's like
understand.
taking advantage of, something. And, I don't really obviously agree with that. But
Well,
the
let's
flip
well,
side,
let's put it like this. I think that this is a person, if he's guilty, I think this is a person that wants, that is to say, if all the defense strategies collapse and he does wind up sentenced, this is somebody who I can picture talking a lot because he would like the notion of his case being studied in criminological courses the same way the people were studied that he had been reading about. Because the whole point is, I'm smarter than them.
right,
You should be
right,
talking about me. You see, and so I think what I would anticipate is right now you've got this whole puppet master thing going on, and whatever. And I always thought, the alibi of, I was out looking at the stars was extremely interesting because, again, think about the kind of personality that would be doing that. Somebody who is meticulously studying something that he can't actually touch or have,
right, right.
right? Which is precisely what I think he was doing, if he's guilty, with the
Yeah,
victim that was
right,
in his eye, right? I can't have you. You're too far away. If I touch you, I'll be destroyed. That kind of thing. And it reminds me of Fraser Crane on Frasier when he gets a Lifetime Achievement Award, and he prepares his speech, and the opening line is, "When I was a child, my parents told me to reach for the stars, and when I was older, I came to realize that were I to actually touch one, I would be vaporized instantly."
right,
Well,
Sounds like
that's
Frasier.
kind of what you have to understand about this kind of person is that, if he were to ever be the dog who caught the car, he wouldn't know what to do with them.
right,
He studies people from far away, sort of like those people who devote their entire life to studying something that they'll never see. This is so
right,
fascinating, like a theologian. The theologian knows everything about God, but has never seen him.
right, right.
See, that
That,
kind of thing. It fascinates me. And so this is the kind of person who would want to study a person because he could never actually be with them. He would know everything about them, watch them. No, I mean, I've had conversations with stalkers, for example. Now, I'm not saying there was stalking here. I know that that term has been dismissed, although I think there must have been some means of watching or looking or surveying, because how else do you become aware of the whereabouts of a stranger that you've targeted? How do you even get to like them?
Right.
Focus on them. Well, but anyway, but I've talked to some stalkers, and they'll say things like, I was watching the person that I was fixated on, and I noticed that on this particular day they had their hair up in a ponytail, and they normally keep it down. And I'll say, "Did you notice any more pattern than that?" And they'll say, "Yeah, I noticed it was a Tuesday."
Mm,
And then I started to wait to see if like every Tuesday they would wear their hair like that. That kind of stuff, like
yeah.
really minute detail. And the person doesn't even know they exist. I mean, can
Right.
you imagine if there's a person walking around on the street that knew things like what cereal you eat in the privacy of your home, like
No, it's just so
the
creepy.
color of, the nightgown you put on when you go to sleep at night,
Right.
the order in which you call your friends on the phone or what you watch on television. Imagine somebody knowing everything about you that you don't even know is there watching you.
Right.
And I think you'd start to understand the kind of relationship that a person like this would have with the object of their interest. And does that have a spectrum equality? Well, certainly has an obsessional quality to it.
Right. Right.
But there's something going on there that if that was what was happening, this is definitely some kind of overly intellectualized, meticulous, scientific figure that gets a godlike feeling from watching, people as if they are, amoeba in a petri dish,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that I am very interested in that never gets talked about him, and again, I'm interested in the spectrum question, is that remark that he supposedly made to a date where he said that she had nice birthing hips.
Right. I remember
And
that.
and
Yeah.
then there was this that remember the photo of him in like the front row at the Margaret Atwood talk, the author
Yeah.
of The Handmaid's Tale. I always wondered if I find myself curious if he's guilty, if when he looked at a woman, he was interested almost like the way a scientist would think about an animal being interested in like their breeding potential. It's like a
Yeah.
kind of a weird, it's a very odd remark to make to somebody like, "Oh, you have excellent birthing hips," and then the interest in the Handmaid's Tale
Somebody
and all
told
that.
me that one time,
That's
and
the
it
part of
was
Atwood.
offensive.
I just think there might have been some weird interest in something like that we don't understand yet.
Yeah,
But I
I
don't
would have
picture
been,
this
like,
person.
running
Yeah.
to the hills with that comment. That would have been, like, so weird. But I also wanted to mention to you, Dr. Gary, that on Hulu, you may have already seen it, but there's, it's like a two-part series about incels, and it's a guy
Oh
in
yeah, yeah, I
England.
know it. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
I just remember when you had, talked about incels, and then I saw it, and I was like, "Oh, when I have, some time for myself, I'm gonna watch it." And I was very, like, almost, like, sad for, like, this group of men who just are overthinking, like, everything, like, about women and how women think and how they
Yeah.
just detach from society and trying to, like, just, talk to people because they don't consider themselves, like, a Chad or, whatever it is, but, I didn't know if,
Well,
like, you had seen it, but
I am
I
so
thought
happy
about
I
you.
am not a Chad. I do not want to be a Chad. Let me put it that way.
Right.
No thanks.
All right, we
But,
got we got another call.
but
Well, listen, that was a really interesting call, and I hope that some of what I said was interesting to you.
I like
very
to
much so.
listen.
And
I've literally I usually fall asleep, like, when you guys are on the air because I have a 4-year-old son, and typically I'll be like, I'll come down and watch a movie or something with my husband, and 9 out of 10 times I'm passed out sleeping. So I was so excited I stayed awake to get on the show tonight. So thank y'all so much, and I hope you have a great
You're
night.
welcome.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Bye.
take care of yourself. We have somebody else on the line.
Yeah. She
Beautiful.
probably falls asleep when you're talking, not me. All right, here we
It's
go.
my sonorous voice. It's the dulcet tones of my voice. What can I tell you?
All right. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yay.
Yes, indeed.
Hey guys, I go by Precocent. I wanted to say, Josh, I love when you have Dr. Gary on, and I'm happy to see that the Lab After Dark is also doing really well, because I know you were there's been a couple times when you've talked about ending that, but I always enjoy those as
I
well.
appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Ending what? The
Um,
After Dark?
yeah.
Oh yeah.
She talking about the After Dark, Josh?
Oh yeah. Definitely.
You were thinking about ending?
It's like probably 4 different
I
times.
didn't know that.
Yep.
Oh, you're like
But
those,
right now
okay.
I'm committed to it right now. So
You're like those advertisers. Buy this DVD now; it will never be released again. Like you must own this 14th
sometimes I
copy
feel
of
like
Cinderella.
sometimes I feel like I neglect this channel because of that channel.
Oh,
But
okay.
and many other things too. It's just but no, I'm committed to it, and I do appreciate it. I do appreciate the support and love over there. People do really enjoy it. So yes, it's doing very well. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Dr.
so please
Gary.
go on.
Oh, I'm a huge fan. I'm a student of psychology myself, and
Oh, where?
COVID. I'm a single mother, and COVID kind of put a wrench in things, and so I'm on hiatus. But I still consider myself a student of psychology. I'm a
You'll go
pro
back.
dom.
You'll go back.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
absolutely will. I'm a pro dom as my profession, and so I deal with a lot of psychology. And
Of course.
I do a lot of work on another pretty hot button case that probably shouldn't be mentioned right now because
No,
it's
please don't.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of those. But as a pro dom and working in a holistic way, kind of an energy type of practice. I consider myself to be like a light worker who plays in the shadows. And when I hear you talk about these cases and studying these cases and just the darkness of it, and I see you bringing so much light to it, and sort of imagine you stepping into these dark places, but keeping yourself grounded in spirituality and in the rest of the world. And I was just curious if how you stay grounded in that, and also if you've had any moments where you have maybe second guessed yourself or faced something that's maybe sort of shattered your worldview a little bit, and how you've handled that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Well, look,
Okay.
I mean, I don't think anybody gets drawn to doing this kind of work without having an empathic nature. And
Sure.
what happens, of course, with any empathic person is that at first you're very flooded with the horror of what you're experiencing. And then there's a kind of adaptive, dissociative process that sets in the same way a surgeon has to become numb to what he's looking at, or a soldier, or whatever. You just sort of numb out to it and you compartmentalize it. and then it starts to come out here and there, in a dream here, or a kind of a stray memory there. But you sort of stick it in a box, and you do that for the sake of the greater good. And I think, you have to understand. I mean, if I'm not talking to an offender that has done god awful things, I'm talking to people that have been victimized by crime, or I'm talking to patients that experience loneliness, depression,
Right.
anxiety, separation, abandonment, sexual abuse, the loss of a loved one, loss of job, loss of self-esteem, and that does take a toll. You become sort of like a battery that gets drained, and you need a little break here and there. But what has always motivated me is that you have to remember, before I got into this, I wanted to be a priest. And I always had an identification with the notion that, um, if you have a kind of calling to do these things, the point is to exhaust yourself, to empty yourself. And so every time I would feel overwhelmed by it or tired, whatever, I would say, well, that's precisely when I need to push on. I've
Mm.
taken 20 calls today, and this 21st person wants to talk to me, like, I'm going to listen to them too. And I think what happens is that after enough years of doing that, it becomes so second nature to you that you don't even think about it. I mean, if you had any idea what I accomplish in a day, it would shock you. It's almost otherworldly what I can do in a day. But it's because I've made a kind of art out of trying to live what it is that I believe. And it is very, very, very important to me to swallow whatever reaction I'm having to things, because I know that it's helping a human being. Or it is bringing justice to a case, um, where people are going to get closure because of it. And what starts to happen after a little while is that, without realizing it, you're doing it even in your private life. You
Yes.
are helping the waiter, in the restaurant, who comes over, recognizes you because you're always eating there, and decides to tell you about a problem his daughter is having in school. Or you go to a wake service, and you're reminding crying family members that, death is just a kind of transition. Or you are doing a podcast, and people are calling in, and you're taking the opportunity to try to give them some light when they're kind of scared, or horrified by something. And I mean, that's the whole idea. I always try, in every relationship that I have,
Hey, while he's
to leave
frozen, what's a
people
pro,
that
Dom?
oh, am I still
Oh,
frozen, Josh?
I could still hear him.
Am I still frozen, Josh? No, Josh is frozen.
Oh, he is, isn't he?
Yes. You hear me? I
Maybe
wonder if the audience hears
I
us.
can
Let's
hear
see.
you. What's going on in the
That
chat?
must be draining. Okay. Yeah, I'm not frozen, I think. But boy, is he frozen. He looks like the Statue
Yeah,
of
he is.
Liberty or something, with his arm up like that. But I guess, just to finish the point, I'll just say that, the way I try to see it is that, I try to think of life kind of like a novel, where no character has been put into it for no reason. Like, I don't think the editor would leave that character in if they didn't have a function in
Mm,
the story. So if
yeah,
the
that makes sense to
person
me.
passes in front of me, I think, what am I supposed to do here? You know?
Yeah, I
And
relate to
and
that.
I try to leave everybody, even if it's people, in my life that I've connected with as friends, or romantically, or family, or whatever. I always try to think to myself, like, why are they asking me this question? What are they trying to resolve in their own heart with that question? What do they need? And then when you think that way, you don't ever want to say no to anybody. Like, it just
Yeah,
happened to me
yeah.
recently that somebody came up to me on a subway and said to me, "Do you have a tissue?" And I thought to myself, why is this character crossing my path? can ask me for this tissue. So I asked them, I said, is everything okay? Is everything all right? I mean, are you sick? You know? And then they started to tell me that they had had a recent loss and they felt like they were going to cry and they wanted to use the tissue for that reason or whatever. So in other words, you really get the sense that all these little interactions have an enormous effect, a ripple effect, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
And
Yeah. I relate
and
to
they
that.
really do. I mean, I'll tell you a little story, a true story that I'll never forget as long as I live, because it is absolutely true. In the city here, we have a whole bunch of subway lines, the A and the B and the C and the whatever. And we have one that is called the M train, which is an interesting subway line that was built basically to get people out to the cemeteries of Queens. And what happened is one day I got on the train and there weren't that many open seats. And at that time, there were these newspapers that these people would go around giving out on the train that were free, like the AM New York or whatever it was.
Mhm.
Some
Oh yeah.
people in the audience may be talking about. And there was one that was sort of rolled up and left in the empty seat between two people. So I sat down there, and the newspaper was annoying because I noticed it was under me. So I got up and I moved it to this little sliver of space that a person couldn't fit into that was between two other people so I could sit in the seat. Anyway, one of the people next to the newspaper now gets up and gets off, and a man sits down about 2 or 3 stops after I got on, and he starts reading it. And a few stops later, another seat opens up, and a woman gets on, and she sits down, and the man is reading the newspaper, and she's like reading over his shoulder. She's reading the newspaper over his shoulder. And he turns to her and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, whatever." And they started a conversation. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, I went out to a movie theater and they were on a date
Oh my
in the movie
goodness.
theater, the two of them. And I turned to the person I was with and I said, "These two better thank me." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "If I didn't move that damn newspaper, these
Oh my
two
goodness.
wouldn't have gotten together." You see
Hey,
the point?
hey, Doc, that's a
Right.
great story. What
Yeah.
is a pro dom?
Okay. All right. A pro dom.
That's a great story. What is a pro dom? And I hope that people in the audience, enjoyed it, that they didn't get completely bored out of their minds by it. What did you think? Did you enjoy the conversation
I
on
always
the more obscure killers? Okay,
thought it was
we are going to do Warnos though. We promised.
Warnos, and then yes,
Zodiac. Yeah.
and Zodiac as well. So, all right, we're gonna wrap it up here. For
Just stay on with me a minute, Josh. I'll talk to you after.
for Dr. Gary, and happy birthday, you guys! Thank you so much for being here. We'll talk to you soon. Oh, and Lisa, thank you for gifting 5 Lab After Dark memberships. It's very kind of you. All right, we're out
When
of
the
here.
live ends, let me know. Okay. It looks like it's still